Welcome to World of Sleepcraft. Tonight we journey into the realm of death itself, exploring the complete story of the Shadowlands. From the cosmic origins of the afterlife to the fall of the jailer, this is a tale of souls and sacrifice, of eternal powers brought low by mortal heroes. It is a story that touches every being who has ever lived, for death comes to all, and what awaits beyond the veil has fascinated mortals since the dawn of consciousness. Settle in, let the weight of the day slip away, and allow yourself to drift as we explore the realm that awaits every soul when their mortal journey ends. The tale we tell tonight spans eons and dimensions, touching upon themes of judgment and redemption, of tyranny and freedom, of the eternal struggle between those who would dominate and those who would remain free. It is a story of the Shadowlands, but it is also a story about what it means to live, to die, and to face whatever comes next. When mortal beings die on Azeroth, their souls do not simply cease to exist. They pass through a barrier known as the Veil, crossing from the world of the living into a realm beyond ordinary understanding. The passage itself is gentle for most, a gradual fading of awareness, followed by a sense of movement, of transition, of leaving one state of being and entering another. Those who have died and returned speak of it as falling asleep, only to awaken somewhere entirely new. This realm is the Shadowlands, the cosmic plane of death, an infinite dimension where countless afterlives exist to receive the souls of the departed. It is a place older than mortal memory, crafted by beings of unfathomable power called the First Ones, architects of reality itself, who shaped the very foundations of existence. To understand the Shadowlands is to glimpse the underlying structure of the cosmos, to perceive the careful design that governs not just death, but life itself. The First Ones were the original shapers of the cosmos, beings whose nature remains mysterious, even to the eternal ones they created. They designed the 6 cosmic forces that govern existence: light and shadow, life and death, order and disorder. For each force, they created realms and servants, systems and purposes, all interconnected in a vast web of cosmic significance. The Shadowlands were their realm of death, the place where the cycle of mortality would find its completion and renewal. To understand the Shadowlands is to understand that death is not an end, but a transition. Every soul that passes through the veil carries with it the essence of a lived life, the accumulated experiences and choices that defined its mortal existence. This essence, called anima, is the fundamental currency of the Shadowlands. It powers the realms, sustains their inhabitants, and fuels the great machinery of the afterlife. Without anima, the Shadowlands would wither and die, their purpose unfulfilled. The Shadowlands are not a single place, but rather an endless collection of realms, each one designed to serve a specific purpose in the grand machinery of death and rebirth. Some of these realms are places of peace and tranquility, where souls find the rest they earned through lives well lived. Warriors might find themselves in realms of eternal battle, where they can fight and feast forever. Scholars might discover libraries that contain all the knowledge ever accumulated. Artists might enter dimensions of pure creativity, where they can practice their crafts for eternity. Others are realms of purpose, where the departed continue to serve functions vital to the cosmic order. The cycle of death requires workers, administrators, soldiers, and servants. Souls that demonstrated particular aptitudes in life might be recruited for these eternal duties, finding meaning in continued service. Still others are places of redemption, where flawed souls are given the opportunity to atone for their sins. The Shadowlands are not without mercy, and even the corrupted can find paths to purification. And some, the darkest of all, are prisons where the most irredeemable are condemned to suffer for eternity. Souls so twisted by evil that they can never be redeemed are sent to places of torment, where they are punished for their crimes and prevented from ever threatening the cosmic order again. These prisons exist because some souls are beyond saving, some evils too complete to ever be undone. At the center of all these realms stands Oribos, the Eternal City. This massive structure serves as a nexus point, the hub through which all souls must pass before being assigned to their eternal destinations. Oribos is built in concentric rings, each one serving different functions in the processing of souls. The outer rings house the attendants, robotic beings who manage the logistics of eternity. The inner rings contain the great gateways to the various afterlives. And at the very center sits the Chamber of Judgment. Oribos is not merely a way station, but the very heart of the Shadowlands, the place where the most important functions of death are carried out. Its golden spires rise into an endless twilight sky, constructed from materials that exist nowhere else in the cosmos. Its halls echo with the whispers of countless souls passing through on their way to whatever awaits them. The air is thick with the flow of anima, currents of spiritual energy that flow through every corridor and chamber. The attendants of Oribos are fascinating beings, automata created by the first ones to maintain the machinery of death. They do not truly live in the way mortals or even eternal ones live. They are programs given form, algorithms made manifest. They process souls with mechanical efficiency, never questioning their purpose, never deviating from their programming. Some have wondered if the attendants are even truly conscious, or if they are simply very sophisticated tools. The being responsible for judging these souls was known as the Arbiter. She sat at the heart of Oribos, a massive figure of cosmic significance who possessed the ability to perceive the entirety of a soul's existence in a single instant. Her form was not flesh, but something more fundamental, a crystallization of the purpose of judgment itself. She did not think as mortals think, did not feel as mortals feel. She simply was, a function made manifest. Every deed, every thought, every choice and consequence would be laid bare before her in the moment a soul arrived. She could perceive not just actions, but motivations, not just outcomes, but intentions. She understood the full context of a life, all the circumstances that had shaped a soul's choices. And in that same moment, she would determine where that soul belonged, sending it through the appropriate gateway to its designated afterlife. For countless ages, this system functioned perfectly. Souls flowed through Oribos in an endless stream, each one judged fairly and sent to the realm that best suited its nature and earned fate. Heroes and villains, saints and sinners, the great and the humble, all passed before the Arbiter's perception and were directed to their eternal destinations. The balance of the Shadowlands was maintained, and the cycle of death proceeded as it was always meant to proceed. The anima generated by these souls sustained the realms, and the realms in turn supported the continued functioning of the cycle. It was death made beautiful, judgment made perfect. It was an elegant system, self-sustaining and self-correcting. When mortal civilizations flourished, more souls arrived carrying more anima. When plagues or wars swept through the living world, the flow of souls increased temporarily. The Shadowlands adapted to these fluctuations, expanding and contracting as needed, always maintaining the balance that kept everything working. New afterlives could be created if needed. Old ones could be dormant during periods of reduced traffic, the whole system breathing with a rhythm that matched the pulse of mortal existence across countless worlds. But nothing, not even the cosmic machinery of death itself, is truly eternal. Perfection is an illusion, and even the greatest designs contain within them the seeds of their own disruption. The system had a flaw, a crack in its foundation that would one day threaten to bring the entire structure crashing down. That flaw began with the being who would become known as the Jailer. The Shadowlands are governed by powerful entities known as the Eternal Ones, beings created by the First Ones to oversee the various aspects of death. Each Eternal One was designed to embody specific traits and fulfill specific purposes. Together, they were meant to maintain the balance that kept the Shadowlands functioning, each one contributing their unique abilities to the grand design. The first and greatest of these was Zovaal. When the First Ones created the system of death, they designated Zovaal as the Arbiter, the judge of all souls. It was his purpose to sit at the heart of Oribos and determine the fate of every being that passed through the veil. He possessed the ability to perceive souls in their entirety, to understand the sum of a life in a single moment, and to assign each soul to the afterlife that best suited its nature. Alongside Zovaal, the First Ones created 4 other Eternal Ones, each one destined to rule over a specific realm and fulfill a specific function. There was Kyrestia, the Archon, who would oversee Bastion and command the Kyrian, angelic beings who served as guides for souls making the journey from life to death. There was the Primus, a being of military genius who would rule Maldraxxus and command the forces that defended the Shadowlands from external threats. There was the Winter Queen, a nature spirit of immense power who would tend to Ardenweald, a realm where wild souls were nurtured and prepared for rebirth. And there was Sire Denathrius, an ancient and cunning being who would rule Revendreth, a realm dedicated to the redemption of prideful and sinful souls. For untold ages, the Eternal Ones worked together in harmony. Zovaal judged the souls that arrived in the Shadowlands, and the other 4 received those souls into their respective realms. The Kyrian of Bastion ferried the departed through the veil. The armies of Maldraxxus stood ready to defend against any threat. The Night Fae of Ardenweald tended to the wild spirits in their care. The Venthyr of Revendreth worked to purify souls burdened by sin, and Zovaal presided over it all from his throne in Oribos, the impartial judge whose wisdom guided the entire system. But Zovaal began to question his purpose. He was the most powerful of the Eternal Ones, the one entrusted with the most vital function in all of death. Yet he was bound by the rules the First Ones had established, forced to follow the design they had created, rather than shaping things according to his own will. He began to wonder why the First Ones had the right to dictate the nature of existence. He began to imagine what he could accomplish if he were free of their constraints. These thoughts grew into ambition, and ambition curdled into something darker. Zovaal came to believe that he was meant for more than simply judging souls. He believed that he should have the power to reshape reality itself, to unmake the flawed design of the first ones and create something better in its place. He began to see himself not as a servant of the cosmic order, but as its rightful master. When Zovaal moved to act on these beliefs, the other Eternal Ones recognized the threat he posed. They could not allow one of their number to seize control of the very fabric of existence, to unmake everything the first ones had created. Together, they moved against him. The conflict that followed was terrible beyond mortal understanding. Powers that could reshape reality itself clashed in the depths of the Shadowlands. Zovaal was mighty, perhaps the mightiest of all the Eternal Ones, but he faced 4 opponents who were nearly his equals, and they fought with the desperation of beings defending everything they held dear. In the end, the 4 Eternal Ones prevailed. They stripped Zovaal of his power, tearing away the very essence that made him the Arbiter. They bound him with magic designed to contain his strength, chains forged from the power of domination that would hold him prisoner for all eternity. And they cast him down into the Maw, the darkest realm in all the Shadowlands, a place of endless torment from which there was meant to be no escape. The Maw had originally been created as a prison for the most irredeemable souls, beings so corrupted that they could never be allowed to exist in any other realm. Now it would serve as Zovaal's prison as well, a place where the fallen Eternal One would be trapped forever, unable to threaten the cosmic order again. But the Shadowlands could not function without an Arbiter. The souls of the dead needed to be judged, needed to be assigned to their proper afterlives. The other Eternal Ones could not allow this vital function to cease simply because Zovaal had been removed. A new Arbiter was created, a being without personality or ambition, an entity that would judge souls with perfect impartiality and never seek to exceed its station. This new Arbiter was placed at the heart of Oribos, and the flow of souls resumed. The system continued to function, seemingly unchanged, as if Zovaal had never existed at all. But Zovaal had not been destroyed. He had only been imprisoned. And in the depths of the Maw, surrounded by the tormented souls of the damned, the fallen Eternal One began to plan his escape. He had been patient before his fall, willing to wait for the right moment to act. Now he would be patient again, waiting for opportunities, cultivating allies, slowly building the power he would need to break free of his chains and claim what he believed was rightfully his. Millennia passed. Ages rose and fell on Azeroth as in countless other worlds. Empires were born and crumbled to dust. Heroes rose and fell, their names remembered for a time and then forgotten. The mortal universe went on with its wars and its heroes, its triumphs and its tragedies, unaware of the cosmic prison that held one of the most dangerous beings in existence. And all the while, Zovaal waited in the darkness, his plans slowly taking shape, his vengeance drawing ever closer. He watched through the eyes of his servants, learned from the souls that were cast into his realm, accumulated knowledge and power in increments that were imperceptible individually, but devastating in their aggregate. The jailer was patient in ways that mortal minds could not comprehend, willing to wait for an eternity if that was what his plan required. Bastion is a realm of light and order, a place of gleaming spires and endless fields beneath a sky of perpetual gold. It is here that the Kyrian dwell, angelic beings who serve as the Shadowlands intermediaries with the mortal world. Their purpose is sacred. They are the ones who ferry souls from the world of the living to the realm of the dead, guiding the departed through the veil and delivering them to Oribos for judgment. The Kyrian were created by Kyrestia, the Archon, the Eternal One who rules Bastion from her seat in the Sanctum of Binding. She designed her servants to be paragons of virtue, beings devoted to duty, service, and the abandonment of self. A Kyrian is not meant to be an individual in the way mortals understand the term. They are meant to be vessels of purpose, their past lives and personal attachments stripped away until nothing remains but their commitment to their sacred duty. This process of transformation is known as the Path of Ascension. When a soul arrives in Bastion, having been judged worthy by the Arbiter, they begin as an aspirant. They must prove themselves through trials of virtue, demonstrating humility, righteousness, and dedication. As they progress, they shed the memories and attachments of their mortal lives, becoming ever more focused on their purpose. Eventually, if they succeed in all trials, they undergo ascension and become full Kyrian, ready to take their place among the soul guides who ferry the dead to their rest. Not all who come to Bastion complete this journey. Some find they cannot let go of their past lives, cannot surrender the memories and emotions that defined who they were. Those souls must find their own path forward, either accepting their limitations or struggling to overcome them. The path of ascension is demanding, and not everyone is meant to walk it to its end. Among the souls who came to Bastion was one of the greatest paladins Azeroth had ever known, Uther the Lightbringer. In life, Uther had been the first of the Knights of the Silver Hand, the founder of the Paladin Order that would become synonymous with righteousness and the light. He had served as a mentor to countless young warriors, teaching them the ways of honor and duty. His reputation was without stain, his devotion to justice absolute. Among his students had been the young prince Arthas Menethil, heir to the throne of Lordaeron. Uther had seen great potential in the boy, had hoped that one day Arthas would become a champion of all that was good. He had trained the prince in the ways of the light, had watched him take up the paladin's mantle, had believed that a bright future awaited his protege. That hope had ended in tragedy. When the plague of undeath swept through Lordaeron, Arthas's determination to stop it led him down darker and darker paths. He ordered the purging of Stratholme, killing thousands of innocents before they could turn to undeath. He pursued the dreadlord Mal'Ganis to the frozen continent of Northrend, where his obsession with vengeance led him to claim the cursed runeblade Frostmourne. The moment Arthas touched that blade, he was lost. Frostmourne consumed his soul, transforming him from a righteous paladin into a death knight in service to the Lich King. He returned to Lordaeron not as a savior, but as a destroyer. He murdered his father, King Tyrannus, on the very throne from which he should have ruled. He raised an army of undead that swept across the land, killing everything in their path. When Uther confronted his former student, trying to stop him from claiming the ashes of his father, the legendary paladin faced the creature that Arthas had become. They fought, and for a moment it seemed that Uther might prevail. His faith in the light was strong, his skill with the blade unmatched. He beat Arthas back, sent Frostmourne flying from his hands. but the blade would not be denied. It returned to Arthas as if of its own will, and the power of the Lich King flowed through the Death Knight. Frostmourne pierced Uther's chest, and the legendary paladin fell. His last words were a curse, a hope that there was a special place in torment waiting for his murderer. But Uther's death was not ordinary. Frostmourne was no common blade, but a weapon forged by the runecarver in the depths of Torghast, crafted with the power of the Maw itself and imbued with the essence of domination. When it claimed Uther's soul, something went wrong. The blade tore his spirit in two, trapping one fragment within itself while the other fled toward the Shadowlands. This wounded, incomplete soul was the Uther who arrived in Bastion. The injury was unique in the history of the Shadowlands. Souls were not supposed to be divided. They were supposed to arrive whole, carrying all of their experiences and essence intact. But Uther was only half of what he should have been, the rest of his spirit imprisoned in the very blade that had killed him. This wound would never fully heal, would always leave him incomplete, would always fill him with a rage that the Path of Ascension could not quell. The kyrian who resolved him was named Devos. She was a paragon of her order, one who had long since ascended and devoted herself completely to the service of the Archon. When she touched Uther's soul and perceived the wound that Frostmourne had inflicted, she was disturbed. She had never seen anything like it, a soul scarred by magic that felt like it came from the Maw itself. Devos brought her concerns to the Archon, warning that weapons connected to the Maw were being used in the mortal world. She begged Carestia to investigate, to take action against whatever force was responsible for creating such abominations. But the Archon dismissed her concerns. Bastion was not meant to interfere in the affairs of the living. The kyrian were meant to ferry souls, not to involve themselves in mortal conflicts. Whatever was happening on Azeroth was not their concern. This dismissal planted seeds of doubt in Devos's heart. She had served the Archon faithfully for ages beyond counting, had believed completely in the wisdom of Bastion's ways. But now she began to wonder if those ways were flawed. If weapons of the Maw were being used to wound souls, shouldn't the kyrian do something about it? Shouldn't they act to prevent such horrors from occurring? Uther, meanwhile, struggled with his own demons. The Path of Ascension required him to let go of his mortal attachments, to surrender the memories and emotions that defined who he had been. But he could not release his anger toward Arthas. The betrayal he had suffered burned too deeply, the wound too fresh. Every time he tried to meditate, every time he sought the peace that the path required, he found himself consumed by rage at the student who had murdered him. In time, Devos came to share Uther's anger. She began to believe that the Archon was wrong, that Bastion's neutrality was a form of complicity with evil. She gathered other kyrian who shared her doubts, and together they formed a faction called the Forsworn, kyrian who had rejected the Path of Ascension and sought to forge their own destiny. When Arthas finally fell at Icecrown Citadel, his soul was claimed by the Shadowlands. Uther, now ascended but still burning with unforgiven rage, convinced Devos to help him intercept the Death Knight's soul before it could reach Oribos. Together, they carried Arthas to the edge of the Maw and hurled him into its depths, denying him any chance at judgment or redemption. This act of vengeance would have consequences beyond anything Uther or Devos could have imagined. But at the moment, all Uther felt was satisfaction. The monster who had killed him, who had destroyed Lordaeron, who had brought such suffering to the world, was now condemned to eternal torment. Justice, as Uther understood it, had been served. Maldraxxus is a realm of war and necessity, a land of blasted plains and towering citadels, where the strong rule and the weak serve. It is the military heart of the Shadowlands, home to the armies that defend death itself from external threats. Here, souls proven in battle find their eternal purpose as soldiers in conflicts that span the cosmos. The very landscape reflects its martial nature. Bones of ancient leviathans form bridges across toxic rivers. Fortresses carved from living rock bristle with weapons, and the air itself carries the sounds of distant combat and the acrid smell of alchemical fire. Unlike the serene meadows of Bastion or the enchanted glades of Ardenweald, Maldraxxus embraces a harsher beauty. There is grandeur in its towering war machines, elegance in the perfect execution of a tactical maneuver, art in the forging of a weapon that will serve for eternity. The souls who come here are those who understood these things in life, who saw glory in battle and honor in the warrior's calling. They are not bloodthirsty savages, but disciplined soldiers, and Maldraxxus provides them with wars worthy of their skills. The realm is divided into 5 houses, each one specializing in a different aspect of warfare. The House of the Chosen produces elite warriors, champions who embody the finest combat traditions. Its arenas ring with the clash of steel as warriors train endlessly, honing skills that were already formidable in life to levels of perfection only possible with eternal practice. The greatest champions of the House of the Chosen are legendary even among the other houses, warriors whose names are spoken with reverence across all of Maldraxxus. The House of Rituals practices necromantic magic, wielding death itself as a weapon. Its leeches and sorcerers can raise the fallen to fight again, can curse enemies with diseases of the spirit, can twist the very essence of death into weapons of terrible power. They are the magical arm of Maldraxxus's military, their spells complementing the martial prowess of the other houses. Their citadels are filled with libraries of forbidden knowledge, laboratories where new forms of magic are developed, and meditation chambers where powerful necromancers commune with forces beyond mortal understanding. The House of Constructs creates undead monstrosities, building soldiers from the parts of the fallen. Fleshsmiths of unparalleled skill assemble warriors from the components of countless corpses, creating beings of terrifying power and near indestructibility. The great constructs of this house are walking siege engines, capable of smashing through fortifications that would withstand any other assault. The house also maintains the abominations that serve as heavy infantry, the stitched horrors that strike fear into even the most hardened foes. The House of Eyes gathers intelligence, its spies and assassins operating unseen across the Shadowlands. Its agents can infiltrate any organization, impersonate any being, extract any secret. They are the shadow that moves unseen, the whisper that carries deadly secrets, the blade that strikes without warning. The Margrave of the House of Eyes knows everything that happens in the Shadowlands, every plot and counterplot, every secret alliance and hidden betrayal. This knowledge is power, and the House of Eyes wields it with surgical precision, and the House of Plagues develops weapons of biological warfare, diseases, and toxins that can bring down armies. Its laboratories brew concoctions of unimaginable lethality, plagues that can spread through populations like wildfire, poisons that can kill with a single drop. The House of Plagues understands that sometimes the most efficient way to win a war is to never fight it at all, to simply eliminate the enemy before they can take the field. Its weapons are terrible, but war is terrible, and Maldraxxus does not flinch from what must be done. Together, these 5 houses form the military might of the Necrolord Covenant. They are meant to work in harmony, each house contributing its unique strengths to the defense of the Shadowlands. When external threats emerge, whether from the void, the light, or any other cosmic force, the armies of Maldraxxus march to meet them. The coordination of the houses is a thing of deadly beauty. Intelligence from the eyes guiding the strategies of the chosen, constructs providing the heavy assault capability, while plagues and rituals soften enemy defenses. The ruler of Maldraxxus is the Primus, the eternal one who embodies the 5 traits of the ideal Maldraxxi soldier: ambition, might, insight, guile, and relentlessness. He is a being of legendary tactical genius, a warrior philosopher who has never lost a battle in all the ages of his existence. Under his leadership, Maldraxxus has defended the Shadowlands against countless threats, its armies standing as the bulwark between death and annihilation. The Primus is also known as a legendary craftsman, a smith who forges weapons of terrible power. In ages past, he studied the magic of domination, the power that had been used to bind Zovaal to the Maw. He believed that understanding this magic was essential to defending against it, that only by mastering domination could the Shadowlands be protected from those who would wield it. This knowledge would one day prove to be his undoing. Among the souls who found their way to Maldraxxus was an orc warrior named Draka. In life, Draka had been the mate of Durotan, chieftain of the Frostwolf clan, and mother to Thrall, who would one day become war chief of the Horde. She had lived a life of courage and struggle, fighting against the corruption that consumed her people and dying when assassins of Gul'dan's Shadow Council murdered her and Durotan. In the Shadowlands, Draka proved herself a warrior without equal. She rose through the ranks of the House of the Chosen, eventually becoming one of Maldraxxus's most trusted champions. Her skill in battle was matched only by her tactical acumen, and she embodied everything the Necrolords valued: strength, determination, and an unwavering commitment to duty. But when the anima drought struck the Shadowlands, Maldraxxus fell into chaos. Without sufficient anima to sustain them, the 5 houses began to turn on each other. Old rivalries flared into open warfare. The House of Rituals and the House of Constructs formed an alliance against the others, seeking to claim what remaining resources existed. The House of Eyes was destroyed entirely, its members scattered or slain. At the heart of this conflict was a terrible truth. The Primus had vanished. The leader of Maldraxxus, the one being who could have restored order and united the houses, was simply gone. No one knew where he had gone or what had happened to him. His throne sat empty, and without his leadership, the realm tore itself apart. Draka and the House of the Chosen fought to maintain some semblance of order, but they were overwhelmed by the forces arrayed against them. Margrave Crexus, the leader of the House of the Chosen, fell in battle, leaving his house leaderless and vulnerable. It seemed that Maldraxxus would destroy itself from within, its armies so consumed by civil war that they would be unable to fulfill their purpose of defending the Shadowlands. The truth behind the Primus's disappearance was far darker than anyone suspected. The ruler of Maldraxxus had sensed that something was wrong in the Maw, that Zovaal's influence was somehow spreading beyond his prison. The Primus left his realm to investigate, determined to discover what the jailer was planning and how to stop him. But the Primus had underestimated his brother's power. When he confronted Zovaal in the Maw, the jailer defeated him. Using the magic of domination, Zovaal stripped the Primus of his memories, turning the great warrior philosopher into a blank slate. He chained this mindless being in Torghast, the Tower of the Damned, and set him to work as a smith, forcing him to forge weapons and armor for the Mawsworn army. The jailer gave his prisoner a new name, the Rune Carver, and for ages, the Rune Carver toiled in Torghast, unable to remember who he truly was, unable to resist the commands of his captor. The weapons he forged included some of the most terrible artifacts ever created. Frostmourne, the rune blade that would one day claim the soul of Arthas Menethil, and the Helm of Domination, which would create the Lich King and unleash the Scourge upon Azeroth. The Primus's knowledge of domination, the very knowledge he had gained to defend against it, had been turned against him and against the mortal world. The jailer had transformed one of his greatest enemies into one of his most useful tools. Ardenweald is a realm of eternal twilight, a forest of impossible beauty where the spirits of nature find their rest. Great trees rise toward a sky filled with twinkling motes of light, their branches draped with luminescent foliage that glows with the essence of anima. It is a place of quiet majesty, a sanctuary where the wild spirits of countless worlds are nurtured and prepared for rebirth. The very air hums with life force, with the patient pulse of nature's eternal heartbeat, with the gentle song of growth and renewal. Unlike the other realms of the Shadowlands, Ardenweald feels alive in a way that defies the association of death with stillness and silence. Bioluminescent flowers bloom in patterns that shift with the moods of their caretakers. Crystal streams carry waters infused with pure anima, their currents flowing in directions that obey no conventional physics. Groves of ancient trees communicate in rustling whispers, sharing wisdom accumulated over countless cycles of death and rebirth. This is not a place of endings, but of transitions, a cosmic nursery where worn spirits are restored before beginning again. The realm is ruled by the Winter Queen, a being of ancient power who embodies the cycle of death and renewal that governs all natural things. She is sister to Elune, the moon goddess worshipped by the night elves of Azeroth, though the nature of their relationship is complex and mysterious. Where Elune represents the light of life, the Winter Queen represents the necessary darkness of death, the period of rest that must come before new life can begin. They are two aspects of the same cosmic truth, that life and death are not opposites, but partners, each giving meaning to the other. The Winter Queen's court is a place of terrible beauty and fathomless age. She sits upon a throne of living wood that has grown through countless eons, its branches intertwined with flowers that have bloomed since before the first mortals drew breath. Her attendants are ancient spirits, beings who have served the cycle since its beginning, who remember times when the first ones still walked among their creations. She rarely speaks, for she rarely needs to. Her will shapes Ardenweald as naturally as sunlight shapes the growth of a tree. Yet for all her power, the Winter Queen carries a burden of profound loneliness. Her sister Elune dwells in the realm of light, separated from her by cosmic distances that even beings of their power cannot easily bridge. They have not truly spoken in ages beyond mortal counting, though sometimes the Winter Queen senses echoes of her sister's light in the souls that come to Ardenweald. This connection sustains her, even as its incompleteness grieves her. The inhabitants of Ardenweald are the Night Fae, nature spirits of various forms and purposes. Some resemble the fairies of mortal legend, small-winged beings of mischief and delight who flit among the branches and tend to the smaller wildweeds with dedicated care. Their laughter echoes through the glades, a reminder that even in the realm of death, there can be joy. Others are more primal, great beasts and ancient trees given life and consciousness, beings whose mere presence shapes the landscape around them. Still others are former mortals who have earned their place among the Night Fae through their devotion to nature, souls whose love of the wild earned them eternal purpose in its service. All of them serve the cycle of rebirth, tending to the souls in their care and preparing them for their return to the mortal world. This is sacred work, arguably the most important function in all the Shadowlands, for without it the wild spirits would fade forever, and nature itself would begin to die across countless worlds. When a wild spirit dies in the mortal realm, its essence travels to Ardenweald. There, it is placed within a wildweed, a magical pod that serves as a cocoon for the regenerating soul. The Night Fae tend to these wildweeds, feeding them anima and nurturing the spirits within until they are ready to be reborn. This cycle ensures that the wild spirits of the cosmos never truly die, but are constantly renewed, their essence passing from life to death to life again in an endless dance. Among the souls that came to Ardenweald was Ysera, the great green dragon who had been one of the 5 dragon aspects of Azeroth. In life, Ysera had been the dreamer, the guardian of the Emerald Dream, the natural blueprint from which Azeroth's wild places had been shaped. She had watched over the natural world for countless millennia, her dreams nurturing the forests and glades of the mortal realm. But Ysera had fallen to corruption, her spirit tainted by the emerald nightmare that had infected her domain. When she finally succumbed to the corruption and was slain, her soul traveled to Ardenweald, where she was placed within a wildweed to be healed and eventually reborn. The Winter Queen herself took charge of Ysera's wildweed, recognizing the importance of this great nature spirit. The connection between Ardenweald and the Emerald Dream runs deep. The two realms are mirrors of each other, one representing the natural world in its living state and the other representing the same world in its resting state. What happens in one affects the other, and the health of both realms is intertwined. When the Night Fae flourish, so too does the Emerald Dream. When Ardenweald suffers, nature itself feels the effects, and suffer it did when the anima drought struck. Of all the realms of the Shadowlands, Ardenweald was perhaps the most dependent on a constant flow of anima. The wild weeds could not regenerate without it. The spirits could not be nurtured without it. The glow of the forest began to fade, the luminescent flowers dimming, the magical streams running dry. When the supply of anima suddenly ceased, Ardenweald began to wither and die. The Night Fae worked desperately to stem the tide, to share what little anima remained between the most vital wildweeds, but it was never enough. The realm was dying, and nothing they did could stop it. The Winter Queen faced an impossible choice. She did not have enough anima to save all the souls in her care. Some of the wildweeds would have to be sacrificed so that others could survive. The decision tortured her, for she loved every spirit in her realm, had nurtured each one with the care of a mother for her children. But the mathematics of survival were brutal. If she tried to save everyone, she would save no one. She chose those souls she deemed most important, allocating what little anima she had to the spirits whose loss would be most devastating to the natural order. Great nature spirits, ancient powers whose influence stretched across countless worlds, were preserved. Other wildweeds, those holding spirits of lesser cosmic significance, were left to wither, their souls fading into oblivion. Each one that faded was a light going out forever, never to return. It was a cruel calculus, but the Winter Queen saw no other option. She could not save everyone. She could only try to save as many as possible, to preserve the cycle of rebirth as best she could, until the crisis passed. But each soul she lost was a grief that weighed upon her, a reminder of the terrible choice she had been forced to make. She kept count of them, remembered each one's name, carried their memory as an eternal burden. When mortal champions arrived in Ardenweald, they found a realm in crisis. The once vibrant forest was fading, its light dimming, its inhabitants desperate. The Night Fae were doing everything they could to preserve what remained, but they were fighting a losing battle. Without a renewed flow of anima, Ardenweald would eventually die, and with it, the cycle of natural rebirth would be broken forever. The Winter Queen was suspicious of these mortals at first. Why should beings from the world of the living concern themselves with the affairs of the dead? But as the champions proved their worth, as they worked to uncover the source of the anima drought and to restore balance to the Shadowlands, she came to see them as allies in the fight to save her realm. Revendreth is a realm of Gothic grandeur and eternal twilight, a land of towering spires and Baroque architecture where sin is harvested like a crop. Stone castles pierce the crimson sky, their halls echoing with whispered confessions and the cries of souls in torment. It is a place of redemption, but also of punishment, where the prideful and the arrogant are brought low before they can move on to other afterlives. The very landscape is designed to humble, mountains of impossible height, remind souls of their insignificance, and the perpetual darkness serves as a constant reminder that the light must be earned. Unlike the natural beauty of Ardenweald or the serene order of Bastion, Revendreth possesses a darker aesthetic. Its architecture speaks of decadence and power, of the arrogance that the realm is designed to strip away. Gargoyles watch from every parapet with knowing eyes. Fountains run with blood-red liquid that may or may not actually be blood. The stone of which the castles are built seems to drink in light rather than reflect it, creating shadows within shadows, darkness that moves and whispers. The realm is divided into various territories, each controlled by powerful Venthyr lords known as harvesters. These ancient beings answer to the sire himself, managing the extraction of sin from souls assigned to their domains. Each harvester has developed particular expertise in different categories of sin. Some specialize in pride, others in greed, still others in wrath or envy. The competition between harvesters to produce the most anima is fierce, driving them to develop ever more effective methods of extraction. The process of sin extraction is not arbitrary cruelty, but a precisely calibrated spiritual surgery. When a soul arrives in Revendreth, it is assessed for the nature and extent of its sins. A treatment regimen is designed, specific to that soul's particular failings. The soul might be placed in scenarios designed to confront it with the consequences of its actions, forced to experience what its victims felt, shown the full weight of the harm it caused. This is painful, devastatingly so, but the goal is not punishment for its own sake. The goal is transformation. The purpose of Revendreth is to extract anima from souls burdened by sin. When mortals die carrying excessive pride, vanity, greed, or other flaws, they are sent here to be purified. The process is not gentle. The Venthyr, the vampire-like inhabitants of Revendreth, subject their charges to torments designed to strip away their sins layer by layer. Only when a soul has been properly humbled can it be redeemed and sent on to whatever afterlife awaits it. Many souls who successfully complete their penance in Revendreth go on to Bastion, where they can serve the greater good with spirits cleansed of the flaws that once burdened them. This process serves a dual purpose. It saves souls that might otherwise be condemned to the maw, giving them a chance at redemption they might not otherwise have. And it produces anima, the essence that sustains the Shadowlands, which the Venthyr harvest from the sin they extract. The anima released when sin is stripped from a soul is particularly potent, rich with the energy that once powered the soul's worst impulses. Revendreth has long been one of the primary sources of anima for the realm of death, its harvests fueling the other realms. This made Denathrius's betrayal all the more devastating. When he hoarded Revendreth's anima rather than sharing it, the entire Shadowlands economy of spiritual energy was thrown into crisis. The ruler of Revendreth is Sire Denathrius, an entity of ancient origin and terrible power. He was among the first beings created by the First Ones, predating even the other Eternal Ones. He shaped Revendreth according to his own vision, creating the Venthyr as extensions of his will. Every inhabitant of the realm, every spire and castle, exists because Denathrius willed it into being. Denathrius presented himself as a benevolent ruler, a stern but fair master who genuinely sought the redemption of the souls in his care. He was charming and sophisticated, cultured in ways that the other Eternal Ones were not. He seemed to care deeply about the proper functioning of the Shadowlands, about maintaining the balance that kept death working as it should. But this was a mask. Behind the charming exterior lurked something far darker. Denathrius had never truly accepted the order imposed by the First Ones. Like Zovaal, he chafed under constraints he had not chosen, rules he had not made. Unlike Zovaal, he was patient enough to hide his resentment, cunning enough to work toward his goals without revealing his true nature. For ages beyond counting, he had been planning, scheming, preparing for the moment when he would make his move. The Nathrezim were his greatest creation, beings he had designed to serve as agents of his will across the cosmos. These dreadlords, as they came to be known, were infiltrators without peer, creatures capable of assuming any form and manipulating any target. Denathrius sent them out into the universe to spread the influence of death, to weaken the other cosmic forces, to prepare the way for what was to come. The Nathrezim infiltrated the Burning Legion, allowing themselves to be believed as demons while secretly serving their true master. They whispered in the ears of Sargeras, the fallen titan, stoking his fears of the void and guiding his actions in ways that served Denathrius's purposes. They helped create the Lich King, orchestrating events to ensure that Azeroth would be weakened by undead armies that served death rather than the Legion. When Zovaal was cast into the Maw, Denathrius saw an opportunity. He secretly allied himself with the imprisoned Eternal One, channeling anima from Revendreth into the Maw to fuel Zovaal's growing power. He shared intelligence gathered by his Nathrezim, helping the jailer understand the mortal world he would one day seek to dominate. He became the jailer's most important ally, even as he pretended to be a loyal servant of the Shadowlands' established order. Among the souls sent to Revendreth was Kael'thas Sunstrider, the former prince of the Blood Elves. In life, Kael'thas had led his people through devastating times, only to be corrupted by the fell magic of the Burning Legion. He had become a servant of Kil'jaeden, a tyrant who preyed upon his own people, and ultimately he had been slain by the champions of Azeroth. His soul arrived in Revendreth, carrying the weight of his sins, pride, vanity, and the terrible crimes he had committed in service to the Legion. The Venthyr subjected him to their torments, working to extract the sin from his soul and prepare him for eventual redemption. But Kael'thas's sins were deeply rooted, and his progress was slow. When the Anima drought struck, Revendreth descended into chaos. Denathrius had been siphoning anima to the Maw for ages, but now he accelerated his betrayal, cutting off the flow of anima to the other realms entirely. He claimed that Revendreth needed all its resources to survive the crisis, but in truth, he was funneling everything to his ally in the Maw. A rebellion rose against him. Venthyr, who saw through his lies, who understood that their master was the cause of the very crisis he claimed to be fighting, gathered under the banner of Prince Renethal. This ancient Venthyr had been one of Denathrius's most trusted servants, but he could not accept his master's betrayal of everything Revendreth was meant to stand for. The civil war that followed split Revendreth in two. Castle Nathria, Denathrius's seat of power, became a fortress from which the sire commanded his loyal forces. The rebels held what territory they could, fighting desperately against a foe who commanded vast resources and ancient power. It was a conflict that would only be resolved when outside help arrived. The Maw is the darkest place in all the Shadowlands, a realm of eternal torment from which there is meant to be no escape. It exists at the bottom of the cosmic structure of death, the place where the most irredeemable souls are condemned to suffer forever. There is no sky in the Maw, only an endless ceiling of stone and shadow that seems to press down upon everything below. There is no hope in the Maw, only pain and despair that echo through every corner of its vast expanse. There is no redemption in the Maw, only an eternity of punishment for those whose sins were too great to be purified anywhere else. The very air of the Maw is a torment. It burns in the lungs of those who breathe it, carries whispers of suffering that erode the sanity of any who hear them. The ground is hostile, sharp, and treacherous, designed to make every step a struggle. There is no rest in the maw, no respite from the constant assault on body and soul. Even the silence is painful, filled with the echoes of screams that have been ringing since the realm's creation. The landscape of the maw is a nightmare given form. Jagged mountains thrust up from a barren plain, their peaks wreathed in perpetual darkness. These mountains are not natural formations, but manifestations of despair itself, geological expressions of the suffering contained within the realm. Rivers of souls flow across the terrain, the damned being swept from one torment to another in an endless current of suffering. These rivers have no source and no destination, merely circular currents that carry souls forever in loops of torment. Fortresses of black stone dot the landscape, each one a prison within a prison, holding souls deemed particularly dangerous or valuable. The architecture of these fortresses defies conventional understanding, their walls shifting and reforming to create new cells, new torture chambers, new mechanisms of pain. Some are designed to hold warriors, their defenses oriented against escape attempts by the most powerful souls. Others are designed to break mages, their walls inscribed with runes that drain magical energy and leave their prisoners helpless. Throughout the maw, lesser tormentors go about their work. These beings exist to inflict suffering, to ensure that no soul in the maw ever experiences a moment of peace. Some are former souls themselves, beings who were so consumed by cruelty in life that they were elevated to positions of authority in death. Others are creations of the jailer, manifestations of his will given form and purpose. All of them serve the same function, to make every moment in the maw an eternity of pain. At the center of the maw rises Torghast, the Tower of the Damned. This impossible structure stretches upward toward infinity, its levels shifting and changing in ways that defy logic or reason. From the outside, it appears to be a single tower of black stone, but its interior contains countless floors, each one larger than the one below, each one more terrible than the last. The tower is not merely a prison, but a mechanism, a device designed to break souls and reshape them according to the jailer's will. It is a prison designed to hold the worst of the worst, to break even the strongest wills and crush even the mightiest spirits. Its halls are filled with traps and torments, its chambers home to creatures of nightmare and despair. Every floor presents new challenges, new horrors, new ways to suffer. Those who are imprisoned within rarely survive with their minds intact. Those who do are often transformed, their spirits shattered and reformed in ways that serve the jailer's purposes. The tower is divided into wings, each one dedicated to a different form of torment. Some wings contain physical torture chambers, places where souls are torn apart and reassembled only to be torn apart again. Others contain psychological horrors, illusions that force prisoners to relive their worst moments, to experience their greatest fears, to confront the darkest aspects of their own souls. Still others are more subtle, using isolation and sensory deprivation to slowly erode the will to resist. Ruling over all of this is the jailer, Zovaal himself. Stripped of his power as arbiter, bound by chains of domination, cast into the depths of his prison, he nevertheless commands the maw with absolute authority. The souls condemned here are his to torment as he sees fit, raw material for whatever schemes he devises. The towers and fortresses are his creations, manifestations of his will shaped from the substance of the realm itself. Every shadow in the maw answers to him. Every stone remembers his touch. Every moment of suffering is ultimately dedicated to his glory. For ages, Zovaal remained imprisoned, his plans seemingly thwarted, his ambitions apparently crushed. But he had not been idle. From the moment of his imprisonment, he had been working to escape, to gather the power he would need to break free and claim what he believed was rightfully his. The Forsworn were his army, souls who had chosen to serve him rather than endure eternal torment. Some were broken by his prisons and became willing tools. Others saw opportunity in servitude, believing that by allying themselves with the master of the maw, they could eventually share in his power. Still others were drawn to his vision, attracted by his promise to remake reality according to his design. The magic of domination was Zovaal's weapon, the very power that had been used to bind him. Over the ages of his imprisonment, he had mastered this magic, learning to wield it even more effectively than those who had created it. He could use domination to bend wills, to shatter resistance, to turn enemies into servants. No soul in the maw could resist him, and he planned to extend that control far beyond the borders of his prison. But the maw had one vulnerability that even the jailer could not fully overcome. Nothing could escape. The magic that imprisoned him also imprisoned everyone within, preventing souls from leaving by any ordinary means. This was the great barrier that had kept Zovaal contained for so long, the final safeguard the other Eternal Ones had established to ensure he could never threaten the Shadowlands again, or so they thought. Within Torghast, chained and mindless, the rune carver toiled at his forge. He did not remember who he was, or how he had come to be there. He knew only that he must craft, that he must create, that he must obey the commands of his master. The weapons he forged were sent out into the mortal world through agents the jailer had cultivated, the Nethrazim who served Denathrius, but ultimately answered to Zovaal himself. Frostmourne and the Helm of Domination were the rune carver's greatest creations, though he did not remember making them. These artifacts were designed to extend the jailer's influence beyond the maw, to create a being in the mortal world who would serve his purposes. The Lich King was meant to be Zovaal's herald, a creature who would spread death and gather souls, weakening the mortal world and preparing it for the jailer's eventual arrival. But the Lich King's purpose was rejected by all three mortals who bore the title. Ner'zhul, the orc shaman who was the original Lich King, hated his masters and sought to betray them. Arthas Menethil, who merged with Ner'zhul, eventually stopped the Scourge's expansion and sat upon his frozen throne in isolation. Bolvar Fordragon, who claimed the helm after Arthas's fall, dedicated himself to containing the Scourge rather than unleashing it. The jailer needed a new approach. He needed someone who would willingly serve him, who would actively work to further his goals rather than resisting them. He needed someone who had already glimpsed the maw and understood what he offered. He found that someone in Sylvanas Windrunner. Sylvanas Windrunner was once a hero of her people, the Ranger General of Silvermoon, who defended Quel'Thalas with every fiber of her being. She was beautiful and proud, beloved by her soldiers, respected by her peers. The Windrunner sisters were legendary among the High Elves. Ilaria the eldest, who had gone beyond the Dark Portal to fight the orcs on their homeworld. Sylvanas the middle child, who had risen to the highest military position in the kingdom, and Varisa the youngest, who had married a human mage and bridged the gap between their peoples. Of the three, Sylvanas was perhaps the most dedicated to her homeland, the one who never wavered in her commitment to protecting Quel'Thalas. When the scourge came, Sylvanas fought with everything she had. She organized the defenses, rallied her rangers, set ambush after ambush for the advancing undead. She knew the forests of Quel'Thalas better than anyone alive, and she used that knowledge to harry and delay the enemy at every turn. Her tactics were brilliant, her bravery unquestioned, but the scourge was endless, and for every undead she destroyed, two more rose to take its place. Slowly, inevitably, her forces were pushed back. When Arthas finally caught her, he did not grant her a quick death. Instead, he tore her soul from her body and transformed it into a banshee, a screaming specter bound to serve the Lich King. He took everything she was, everything she had been, and twisted it into something dark and terrible. He made her his slave, forced her to watch as he used her to destroy everything she had loved. The woman who had been Quel'Thalas's protector became its tormentor. Her voice used to spread terror among the very people she had sworn to defend. This was Arthas's cruelty, not merely to kill her, but to make her an instrument of her homeland's destruction. The psychological torture continued even after the fall of Quel'Thalas. Sylvanas was aware of what she was doing, could see herself performing these horrors, but was powerless to stop. She was a prisoner in her own mind, screaming silently as her body carried out Arthas's commands. This experience would shape everything that came after, instilling in her a profound hatred not just of Arthas, but of the very concept of having her will controlled by another. When the Lich King's power weakened enough for Sylvanas to break free, she reclaimed her body and her will. But she was no longer the woman she had been. She was undead, sustained by dark magic, her soul twisted by the trauma of what she had endured. The world looked different through dead eyes. Colors were muted, sounds distorted, and the warmth she had once felt for her homeland was replaced by a hollow ache. She gathered other undead who had similarly broken free and formed the Forsaken, a nation of the dead who sought their own place in the world. The Forsaken were a people without a home. The living viewed them with horror and disgust, unable to see past their rotting flesh to the souls still inhabiting those bodies. Even the Horde, which eventually accepted them as allies, regarded them with suspicion. Sylvanas provided them with something to believe in, a leader who understood their condition, who would fight for their survival, who would never abandon them as the living world had. For years, Sylvanas led the Forsaken as their Dark Lady. She was cunning and ruthless, willing to do whatever was necessary to ensure her people's survival. She allied with the Horde, fought against the Alliance, and pursued her vengeance against Arthas with single-minded determination. The hatred she bore for the Lich King was not merely personal, but existential. He represented everything that had been taken from her, every injustice that had been done to her people. His destruction became her reason for existing. When the Lich King finally fell at Ice-Crown Citadel, she believed she had achieved her ultimate goal. She stood on the platform where Arthas lay dying, watching as his eyes went dim, feeling the satisfaction of a quest completed. But as his life faded, something unexpected happened. She felt no relief, No closure, no sense of peace. She felt only emptiness, a vast and terrible void where her purpose had been. But the fall of Arthas brought no peace. With her vengeance complete, Sylvanas felt only emptiness. She had no purpose, no reason to continue existing. The hatred that had sustained her was gone, and there was nothing left to replace it. In despair, she threw herself from the top of Icecrown Citadel, seeking the oblivion of true death. She did not want to rest, did not want peace. She wanted to simply cease to exist, to escape the hollow torment that her existence had become. What she found instead was the Maw. Instead of oblivion, she found the realm of eternal torment. Instead of peace, she found unending suffering. And in that moment of cosmic horror, as she beheld what awaited her for eternity, everything she had believed about death and meaning shattered completely. When Sylvanas' soul fell into the realm of eternal torment, she saw for the first time the true nature of the afterlife. She saw the souls of the damned suffering in endless agony. She saw the jailer watching from his throne, the master of this realm of nightmares. And in that moment, something fundamental changed within her. The jailer offered her a bargain. He showed her his vision of the future, a new order in which the arbitrary systems of life and death would be swept away. He promised her freedom, true freedom, the end of the cycle that had made her what she was. All she had to do was serve him, to help him break free of his prison, to send him the souls he needed to fuel his plans. Sylvanas accepted. She returned to the world of the living with a new purpose. Everything she had done since that moment, every decision she had made, every atrocity she had committed, was in service to the jailer's plans. The burning of Teldrassil, which had seemed like an act of meaningless cruelty, was actually designed to generate massive amounts of death, sending countless souls to the Maw. Her tenure as war chief of the Horde, which had ended in betrayal and war, was calculated to cause as much conflict and death as possible. And when the time was right, she went to Icecrown Citadel to take the final step. Bolvar Fordragon sat upon the frozen throne, the helm of domination upon his head. He had worn the crown for years, containing the scourge, preventing the undead armies from sweeping across the world. He was a jailer himself, in a sense, bound to his throne by duty and necessity. Sylvanas challenged him, and they fought. Bolvar called upon all the power of the Lich King, unleashing the fury of the scourge against the Dark Lady. But Sylvanas was stronger now, empowered by her bargain with the true jailer. She defeated Bolvar, took the helm of domination from his head, and shattered it with her bare hands. The destruction of the helm tore a rift in the sky above Icecrown, a wound in reality itself. Through this rift, the Maw could be seen, and the barrier between the world of the living and the realm of death was broken. The veil had been pierced, the way to the Shadowlands was open, and the jailer's plan moved into its final phase. When the rift opened above Icecrown, the heroes of Azeroth knew that something terrible had happened. The sky itself had been torn asunder, and through the wound they could see glimpses of a realm that should have remained hidden from mortal eyes. Sylvanas had done something unprecedented, something that threatened the very fabric of existence. The tear hung over Icecrown like a wound in reality, its edges crackling with energies that felt wrong on a fundamental level. Those who looked upon it felt a chill that had nothing to do with the frozen wastes below. The news spread across Azeroth like wildfire. In Stormwind, King Anduin Wrynn convened his advisors to discuss the crisis. In Orgrimmar, the Horde leadership debated how to respond. Both factions recognized the danger, even if they did not fully understand it. Whatever Sylvanas had done, it threatened more than any one nation or people. It threatened the very nature of death itself. But before the champions of the Alliance and Horde could respond, Sylvanas struck again. Her forces, augmented by creatures from the Maw itself, attacked key locations across Azeroth. The Mawsworn came through the rift in waves, creatures that had never before walked the world of the living. They were relentless, tireless, driven by the will of their master in the Maw. Their targets were specific, the leaders who might rally resistance against the Jailer's plans. They captured leaders of both factions, spiriting them away to the Shadowlands before anyone could stop them. Among the captured were Anduin Wrynn, King of Stormwind, the young ruler who had become a symbol of hope for the Alliance, Jaina Proudmoore, Lord Admiral of Kul Tiras, one of the most powerful mages on Azeroth, Bane Bloodhoof, High Chieftain of the Tauren, a voice of honor and moderation within the Horde, and Thrall, the former war chief of the Horde, shaman of tremendous power and moral authority. Each of these figures represented not just political power, but spiritual leadership for their people. Their capture was a devastating blow. The manner of their capture varied. Anduin was taken from Stormwind itself, snatched by Mawsworn agents who materialized within the city's walls. Jaina was ambushed while traveling, her magical defenses overcome by sheer numbers of attackers. Bane was seized from Thunderbluff, his guards overwhelmed in a matter of minutes. Thrall fought fiercely but was eventually subdued by creatures against which his shamanic powers seemed strangely diminished. Each capture demonstrated the Mawsworn's reach and the Jailer's careful planning. Bolvar, Fordragon, freed from the burden of the Lich King, emerged from the frozen throne with dire news. He knew what Sylvanas intended, knew where she had taken the prisoners. The Shadowlands were in crisis, and if something was not done, both the realm of death and the world of the living would be consumed by whatever darkness Sylvanas served. Bolvar himself was a shadow of the man he had once been, his body scarred by the fires that had claimed him at the Wrathgate and the years of bearing the helm of domination. But his mind was clear, and his resolve was unbroken. He brought with him knowledge that no other living being possessed, an understanding of the Shadowlands gained through his connection to the helm. He had glimpsed the realm of death through the eyes of the Lich King's power, had sensed the Jailer's presence even before Sylvanas had made her move. He understood, at least in part, what the heroes would face on the other side of the rift. A coalition formed quickly, warriors from both factions setting aside their differences in the face of this greater threat. They gathered at Icecrown, preparing to make the journey through the rift and into the Shadowlands. Champions who had fought against each other in countless battles now stood shoulder to shoulder, their old enmities rendered meaningless by the scale of what they faced. Bolvar would lead them, his knowledge of the realm of death and his experience with the power of domination making him an invaluable guide. Among those who answered the call were some of Azeroth's greatest heroes, knights and shamans, mages and druids, warriors from every race and background. They came because they understood that this was not a battle for territory or resources, but for the very nature of existence. If the jailers succeeded, if death itself was corrupted, everything they had ever fought for would be rendered meaningless. The crossing was harrowing. The space between worlds was not meant to be traversed by the living, and the forces of the Maw fought to prevent their passage. The rift was not a simple doorway, but a maelstrom of competing energies, a tear in reality that tried to pull travelers apart, even as it drew them through. Some who attempted the crossing did not survive, their souls torn from their bodies by the chaotic forces within the rift. But the champions of Azeroth pushed through, their determination carrying them where mere strength would have failed, emerging at last into Oribos, the eternal city at the heart of the Shadowlands. What they found was a realm in chaos. The golden halls of Oribos were filled with confusion and fear. Souls that should have been judged wandered aimlessly, unable to reach their designated afterlives. The attendants who normally processed new arrivals with mechanical efficiency were overwhelmed, their programming unable to cope with the breakdown of the systems they were designed to maintain. The Arbiter, the being who had judged all souls since Zovaal's fall, was dormant. She sat upon her throne, unmoving, unresponsive, her consciousness absent. Without her guidance, souls arriving in the Shadowlands were not being sorted to their appropriate afterlives. Instead, every soul that died, regardless of their deeds in life, was being funneled directly into the Maw. The four covenants were struggling to survive. Starved of anima by this disruption of the natural order, each realm was suffering its own crisis. The kyrian of Bastion were torn apart by the Forsworn rebellion. Maldraxxus had descended into civil war. Ardenweald was withering without the sustenance it needed, and Revendreth was under the control of a traitor who was actively feeding the crisis. The mortal champions split up, each traveling to a different realm to address the crisis there. This division was necessary because the crises in each realm were so severe that they could not be addressed sequentially. Time was running out for all four covenants, and only by addressing all four crises simultaneously could the champions hope to save the Shadowlands. In Bastion, they helped quell the Forsworn rebellion and restored a measure of order to the kyrian. The conflict there was both military and philosophical, a war of ideas as much as of arms. The champions fought against Forsworn warriors, but also helped facilitate dialogues between the factions, seeking common ground that might end the violence. They uncovered the truth about Devos's motivations, about the wound that Frostmourne had inflicted on Uther's soul, about the legitimate concerns that had driven the rebellion. The resolution was not a simple victory, but a complex negotiation, one that left Bastion changed but intact. In Maldraxxus, they fought alongside Draka and the House of the Chosen to defeat the traitors who had torn the realm apart. The battles there were brutal, the kind of warfare that only the undead could endure. The champions proved themselves worthy allies, fighting with a ferocity that earned the respect of even the most battle-hardened Necrolords. They helped uncover the conspiracy that had destabilized the realm, exposed the agents of the Maw who had been pulling strings behind the scenes, and brought the traitor houses to justice. In the process, they learned of the Primus's disappearance and began to suspect that something far larger was at work. In Ardenweald, they worked to save what could be saved and to preserve the cycle of rebirth. This was perhaps the most heartbreaking of all the assignments, for there was no enemy to fight, no villain to defeat. The anima drought was killing the wild weeds, and no amount of heroism could conjure anima from nothing. The champions worked to triage, to identify which souls were most important to save, to make terrible choices about who would live and who would fade. They helped the Winter Queen bear the weight of these decisions, shared in her grief, and promised to find the source of the crisis and end it. In Revendreth, they allied with Prince Renethal's rebellion and confronted Sire Denathrius himself in Castle Nathria. The assault on the Sire's fortress was one of the most challenging battles the champions had ever faced. Denathrius was ancient beyond comprehension, powerful beyond measure, and utterly ruthless in defense of his domain. His Venthyr loyal fought with fanatical devotion, and the castle itself seemed to resist the invaders. But the champions persevered, fighting their way through layer after layer of defenses, until at last they faced Denathrius himself. The battle was epic, a clash of powers that shook the foundations of Revendreth. In the end, the Sire was defeated, his essence captured in his own blade, his treachery exposed for all to see. As they worked to restore order to the covenants, the champions uncovered the truth about what had happened. The dormancy of the Arbiter was not a natural occurrence, but a deliberate attack. The realization came slowly, pieced together from clues found in each realm, from interrogations of captured enemies, from ancient records that had been long forgotten. When Argus, the corrupted world soul of the Eridar homeworld, was destroyed during the war against the Burning Legion, his death released a burst of energy that struck the Arbiter. This was not an accident, but a carefully orchestrated plan, executed by the Nathrazim according to the jailer's design. The implications of this discovery were staggering. The champions had fought in that war against the Legion, had been part of the force that defeated Argus. They had believed they were saving the universe, and they had been, but they had also been unwitting pawns in a game far larger than they had imagined. The guilt of this realization weighed heavily on many of them, even though there was nothing they could have done differently. The Nathrazim had infiltrated the Burning Legion and engineered its fall precisely so that Argus's death would disable the Arbiter. They had been working toward this goal for millennia, manipulating events across the cosmos to ensure that this specific moment would occur. Every major conflict, every devastating war, had been part of a plan that stretched back to the dawn of the universe, the war of the ancients, the fall of the orcs, the rise of the scourge, the corruption of Argus. All of these had been threads in a tapestry woven by the servants of Denathrius and the jailer. The captured leaders were imprisoned in Torghast, the Tower of the Damned. Each one was held in a different wing of the tower, separated from the others, subjected to torments specifically designed to exploit their weaknesses. The jailer had studied these leaders, had learned their fears and their vulnerabilities, and had crafted punishments that would break them most efficiently. Jaina Proudmoore was subjected to visions of her greatest failures. She saw Arthas falling to darkness, saw Theramore burning, saw every mistake she had ever made replayed in endless loops. The tower forced her to relive the moments when she had failed those she loved, amplifying her guilt until it threatened to consume her entirely. She fought back with the strength of will that had made her one of the greatest mages on Azeroth. But even her formidable mental fortitude was tested by the relentless assault. Bane Bloodhoof was tormented with visions of his father's death, with the knowledge that the horde he had devoted his life to serving had been twisted into something monstrous. He saw the Fourth War through the eyes of those who had died in it, felt their pain and their terror, understood that he had been part of a machine that had caused immeasurable suffering. The tower tried to convince him that honor was meaningless, that his devotion to doing what was right had been naive and foolish. Thrall faced perhaps the cruelest torment of all. The tower showed him what the orcs had become without his guidance, how his efforts to redeem his people had been insufficient, how the horde he had built had been corrupted again and again. It whispered that his connection to the elements, which had been weakened by his actions during the cataclysm, would never fully return, that he was a broken shaman pretending to be whole. The isolation and despair were designed to extinguish the fire that had made him a leader. But the true prize was Anduin. The jailer saw in the young king something valuable, a soul of exceptional purity and strength that could be corrupted and used as a weapon. Unlike the others, who were simply being broken, Anduin was being transformed. The jailer devoted personal attention to his domination, working to corrupt the young king's light-blessed soul and turn it to darkness. The champions launched multiple expeditions into Torghast to rescue their captured leaders. Each venture into the tower was a harrowing experience, a journey through halls that shifted and changed, past traps that seemed almost alive in their malevolence. They fought through hordes of the tower's defenders, faced down nightmares given form, and gradually learned the secrets of navigating the ever-changing structure. And then the champions made a discovery that changed everything. Deep within Torghast, they found the rune carver, still chained, still mindless, still crafting weapons for the Mawsworn. The forge where he worked was a place of dark power, its flames fed by the tormented souls of those sacrificed to fuel the weapon's creation. But as they worked to free him, to restore some measure of his lost memories, they began to realize the truth of who he was. The rune carver was the Primus, the missing leader of Maldraxxus, the tactical genius whose absence had allowed his realm to fall into civil war, had been a prisoner of the jailer all along. For ages beyond counting, he had been forced to serve his brother, his mind emptied of everything that made him who he was, his skills exploited to forge weapons of domination. He was the one who had created Frostmourne and the Helm of Domination, though he did not remember doing so. His knowledge of domination magic, knowledge he had originally acquired to defend against it, had been exploited to forge the very weapons that had caused so much suffering on Azeroth. When the champions recovered the Primus's sigil and returned it to him, his memories flooded back in a torrent of images and sensations. He remembered who he was, remembered what he had created, remembered the shame of what had been done in his name. He broke his chains with a roar of rage that shook Torghast's foundations, reclaimed his true form, and returned to the war against his brother. But the revelation of his captivity underscored how deeply the jailer's influence had penetrated, how long he had been planning, and how close he was to achieving his ultimate goal. The jailer's true plan was terrifying in its scope. He intended to claim the sigils of all the Eternal Ones, powerful artifacts that contained portions of each ruler's power. With all 5 sigils in his possession, including his own, which had been taken from him when he was cast into the Mosh, he would have the power to breach the sepulcher of the First Ones and remake reality according to his design. The sepulcher was the heart of the cosmic order, the place where the First Ones had created the foundations of existence. It contained the power to reshape the universe itself, to unmake what was, and create something entirely new in its place. The jailer believed that he, not the First Ones, should have this power. He believed that the existing order was flawed, that it needed to be destroyed and rebuilt according to his vision. To gather the sigils, the jailer relied on several key allies. Denathrius had already delivered the sigil of Revendreth, which he had possessed since the beginning. The rebellion in Maldraxxus had been orchestrated to isolate and capture the Primus's sigil. The Forsworn in Bastion were preparing to move against the Archon, and in Ardenweald, agents of the Maw sought to exploit the Winter Queen's desperation. But the jailer's most important weapon was Anduin Wrynn. The young king had resisted the jailer's attempts at corruption for as long as he could. His faith in the light, his love for his friends and family, his fundamental goodness, all of these gave him strength to fight against the domination magic being used against him. But the jailer was patient, and domination magic was relentless. In time, Anduin's will was broken. The jailer placed him in a suit of dark armor and gave him a blade forged from the same metal as Frostmourne, Kingsmourne, a weapon that would bind Anduin's soul and make him an instrument of the jailer's will. The boy, who had been a symbol of hope, became a harbinger of despair, a puppet whose strings were pulled by the master of the Maw. The dominated Anduin was sent to Bastion, where he approached the Archon under the pretense of seeking alliance. Kirestia saw the King of Stormwind, a noble soul who had been judged worthy of her realm, and she welcomed him. She did not see the darkness lurking within him until it was too late. Anduin struck without warning, driving Kingsmourne into the Archon and claiming her sigil. In a single blow, he achieved what the Forsworn had been unable to accomplish despite years of rebellion. Bastion's sigil was now in the jailer's possession. When the Covenant forces learned what had happened, they realized that they were running out of time. The jailer now had 3 of the 5 sigils, with only the Winter Queen and the Primus still holding their own. They needed to protect these remaining sigils, while also finding a way to rescue Anduin and stop the jailer from achieving his goals. The Primus, restored to his full power, took charge of the military effort. He coordinated the Covenant forces, organizing them into a unified army that could challenge the Mawsworn. His tactical genius, which had been neutralized for so long by his captivity, was once again available to those fighting against his brother. But even as the Covenants united, the jailer struck again. He attacked the sigil of the Primus, using Anduin as his weapon. In a devastating assault, Anduin cut the sigil from the Primus's body, claiming it for his master. 4 sigils were now in the jailer's hands. Only the Winter Queen's sigil remained. The jailer launched his final assault on Ardenweald, sending the full force of the Mawsworn against the realm of the Night Fae. The invasion was unlike anything the Shadowlands had ever seen. Mawsworn poured through rifts in reality, their numbers seemingly endless, their dedication absolute. They came not to conquer, but to destroy, to burn Ardenweald to ash and claim the Winter Queen's sigil from the ruins. The Winter Queen prepared to defend her domain to the last, knowing that if she fell, nothing would stand between the jailer and his goal. She called upon every spirit in her realm, awakened slumbering powers that had not stirred since the dawn of Ardenweald. The great trees became warriors, their branches sweeping aside attackers like leaves in a storm. The streams and rivers rose up, their waters carrying deadly force. Nature itself rallied to the defense of its queen. The battle that followed was desperate and brutal. The forces of the Covenants fought alongside the Night Fae, throwing everything they had against the invaders. Kyrian descended from the skies in wings of light, their weapons flashing as they struck at Forsworn from above. Necrolords held the ground with implacable determination, their constructs absorbing damage that would have destroyed living warriors. Uther struck from the shadows, their dark powers finding weak points in enemy formations. The Winter Queen herself took to the battlefield, unleashing the full might of nature against her enemies. She was a force of primal power, her presence alone enough to wither Forsworn where they stood. Where she walked, flowers bloomed and died and bloomed again in seconds. The cycle of nature accelerated to a blur. Her power was immense, but so too was the force arrayed against her. For every Forsworn she struck down, two more seemed to take its place. For a moment, it seemed as though they might prevail. The combined forces of the Covenants pushed back against the invasion, held the lines, prevented the Forsworn from reaching the heart of Ardenweald. The Winter Queen's power blazed like a beacon, and hope stirred in the hearts of the defenders. But the jailer had one more card to play. The assault on Ardenweald had been a diversion. Using the 4 sigils he had already claimed, he attacked Oribos itself. While the defenders were focused on Ardenweald, he struck at the Eternal City, overwhelming its defenses with a force of Forsworn that had been held in reserve for precisely this purpose. The attendants of Oribos fought back as best they could, but they were not designed for combat. The city's defenses held briefly, but then crumbled under the weight of the assault. The jailer strode through the golden halls of the Eternal City, cutting down anything that stood in his way, until at last he reached the chamber where the dormant Arbiter sat upon her throne. The final sigil, his own, had been used to create the new Arbiter when he was cast into the maw. It was embedded in her being, the power that allowed her to judge souls. The jailer approached her with something that might have been reverence, or might have been merely satisfaction at the completion of his plan. Then he reached out and tore this sigil from her, claiming the last piece of his stolen power. The Arbiter's form flickered and dimmed, the vessel that had served the Shadowlands for so long now empty and purposeless. Sylvanas was at his side when he did it, the ally who had made all of this possible. She had followed him through every step of his plan, had sacrificed everything, had committed atrocities beyond counting. She had done it all because she believed in what he had promised, freedom from the arbitrary systems that had condemned her to her fate, an end to the cosmic order that had allowed beings like Arthas to destroy her. But as the jailer revealed his true intentions, as he spoke of remaking reality so that all would serve him, something in Sylvanas shifted. She heard the words he was saying, truly heard them for the first time. Not freedom, service, not an end to domination, a new domination, more complete than any that had come before, all souls, everywhere for eternity, bound to his will. She had been promised freedom, an end to the systems that had made her what she was. But the jailer was not offering freedom. He was offering a new kind of slavery, a universe where every being would be bound to his will. She saw the parallels between the jailer and Arthas, the monster who had enslaved her in the first place, and something within her rebelled. The rage that had sustained her for so long, the hatred of those who would control her, now turned against the master she had served. Sylvanas turned against the jailer, raising her bow against the master she had served for so long. Her arrows flew with deadly precision, striking at points that should have been vulnerable. But she was no match for him, not now. Not when he held all 5 sigils. The power of the Eternal Ones flowed through him, making him more than he had ever been. He brushed her aside contemptuously, breaking her like a doll, her arrows shattering against shields of pure cosmic force. But before discarding her, he did one final thing. He returned the fragment of her soul that Frostmourne had claimed so long ago, the piece that had been trapped within the blade when Arthas killed her. It was not a reward, but a mockery, a way of showing her what she had lost. It was cruelty, pure and simple, a final insult to the servant who had dared to defy him. When the fragment merged with what remained of her soul, Sylvanas was overwhelmed. The pieces of her being, separated for so long, came together in a moment of terrible clarity. She remembered who she had been before, the ranger general who had died defending her homeland. She felt the love she had held for her people, the honor she had cherished, the hope she had carried. And then she felt the full weight of everything she had done since, every atrocity, every betrayal, every innocent life snuffed out in service to a lie. The contrast was devastating. She collapsed, broken in a different way than the jailer had intended. The jailer used the 5 sigils to open a portal and escaped through it with Anduin still in his thrall. He was going to Zereth Mortis, the hidden realm where the First Ones had created the foundations of existence. There, in the sepulcher of the First Ones, he would remake reality according to his design. All of his planning, all of his manipulation, all of the suffering he had caused, had led to this moment. Victory was within his grasp. The defenders of the Shadowlands had failed to stop him, but they were not finished yet. Even in defeat, even with the jailer on the verge of achieving his goals, they refused to surrender. They would follow him to Zereth Mortis, would challenge him even in the heart of creation itself. If they were to fail, they would fail fighting. Zereth Mortis was a realm beyond imagining, a place where the fundamental rules of existence had been written. It was not part of the Shadowlands proper, but rather the forge from which the Shadowlands had been created. Here, the First Ones had crafted the mechanisms of death, designing the afterlives and the systems that would govern them. Here, the Arbiter had been created, and here, the jailer intended to unmake everything. The very name meant something like the place of death's shaping in the language of the First Ones, a language that mortal minds could barely begin to comprehend. The landscape of Zereth Mortis defied mortal understanding. It existed in a state of perpetual creation, matter forming and reforming according to principles that had nothing to do with the physics of the mortal world. Mountains floated without visible support. Rivers flowed in spirals that defied gravity. The sky was not a sky, but a ceiling of pure potential, an infinite canvas upon which new realities could be painted. The architecture was even more bewildering. Structures that seemed to be buildings were actually mathematical concepts given physical form. Bridges connected points in space that should not have been adjacent. Libraries contained not books, but crystallized ideas, thoughts of the first ones frozen in geometric perfection. To walk through Zereth Mortis was to feel one's mind stretched in directions it was not designed to go. The realm was inhabited by automa, mechanical beings that had been left behind by the first ones to maintain their creation. These automas did not speak in any language that mortals could understand, their communications consisting of strange musical tones and geometric patterns. Each sequence of tones carried meaning that could not be expressed in words, concepts that existed outside the framework of mortal language. They had been tending to Zereth Mortis for ages beyond counting, waiting for the day when their creators would return. The automa came in many forms. Some were simple maintenance units, small enough to hold in one hand, that tended to the machinery of creation with tireless dedication. Others were massive constructs, beings of metal and light that served as guardians or laborers. Still others seemed to be scholars or administrators, their forms more complex and their behaviors more nuanced. All of them operated according to programming laid down by the first ones, programming that had continued to function perfectly for eons. When the coalition forces followed the jailer to Zereth Mortis, they found themselves in a landscape that defied comprehension. Geometric structures of impossible precision floated in the sky, each one a theorem made manifest. Pools of pure creation energy dotted the terrain, their waters capable of forming new matter from pure thought. The very laws of physics seemed to be suggestions rather than rules, bending and shifting in ways that hurt to perceive. Gravity changed direction without warning. Light bent around corners it should not have been able to navigate. Time itself seemed to flow differently in different parts of the realm. For the mortal champions, simply existing in Zereth Mortis was a challenge. Their bodies and minds were not designed for this place, not adapted to its fluid rules and transcendent geometry. Some experienced disorientation, so severe they could barely stand. Others found their senses overwhelmed by input they could not process. Only through force of will and the support of their companions could they function in this alien environment. The automa initially treated the mortals as threats, attacking them with the same efficiency with which they maintained the rest of their realm. To the mechanical guardians, these beings were errors, anomalies that did not belong in the perfect design of Zereth Mortis. They sought to correct these errors through elimination, their weapons as precise and lethal as everything else in this realm. But as the champions proved that they opposed the jailer, that they sought to prevent the destruction of all that the first ones had created, some automa came to see them as allies. The logic was simple. The jailer sought to corrupt the creation of the first ones, while these mortals sought to preserve it. The enemy of their enemy became their friend. A faction called the Enlightened, brokers who had been stranded in Zereth Mortis and had adopted a more philosophical approach to existence, helped bridge the gap between the mortals and the automa. These brokers had learned to interpret the tones and patterns of the Automa language, had come to understand something of the first one's design. They served as translators and intermediaries, helping the champions navigate both the physical and social landscape of this strange realm. The Primus worked to understand the language of the first ones, hoping to find some weapon that could be used against his brother. He studied the Automa, experimented with the creation forges, and eventually discovered a way to reforge the shattered helm of domination. But instead of recreating the artifact that had created the Lich King, he forged something new, the Crown of Wills, a device that could protect the wearer from domination magic. With this crown, there was hope of freeing Anduin from the jailer's control. The assault on the Sepulcher of the First Ones began. It was the largest military operation the Shadowlands had ever seen, a combined force of all four covenants, augmented by the champions of Azeroth. The Kyrian provided aerial support, their wings carrying them above the battlefield, where they could strike at Forsworn positions. The Necrolords formed the vanguard, their constructs and warriors absorbing the worst of the enemy assault. The Night Fae brought their nature magic to bear, healing the wounded and disrupting enemy formations with entangling vines and bursts of wild energy. The Venthers struck from the shadows, their vampiric abilities allowing them to drain strength from their foes. The Forsworn defended their master fiercely, throwing wave after wave of defenders against the advancing coalition forces. These were souls that had been broken by the Maw, twisted by domination magic into willing servants of the jailer. They felt no fear, no hesitation, no mercy. They existed only to serve, and they served by dying in defense of their master's plans. The battles were brutal, the casualties high, but the coalition pushed forward through sheer determination. The Sepulcher itself was a fortress of unimaginable complexity. Its defenses had been designed by the first ones and augmented by the jailer with domination magic. Reality itself seemed to fight against the invaders, corridors shifting to lead them in circles, gravity reversing without warning, time slowing to a crawl in zones where the defenders could strike with impunity. Progress was measured in rooms rather than miles, each chamber a battlefield where victory was never assured. Anduin himself stood as one of the final guardians, his dominated will forcing him to fight against those who had been his friends and allies. He waited in a chamber of crystal and shadow, Kingsmorn in his hands, his eyes empty of everything that had once made him who he was. The jailer had stationed him here precisely because he knew what Anduin meant too. The champions knew that facing him would be the hardest test they could endure. The battle against Anduin was one of the hardest the champions had ever faced. They were fighting not just against a skilled warrior, but against a symbol of everything they were trying to save. This was Anduin Wrynn, the young king who had always sought peace, who had tried to find common ground even with enemies, who had believed in the fundamental goodness of all beings. To see him twisted into a weapon of the jailer was heartbreaking beyond measure. They did not want to kill the young king. They wanted to free him. But Anduin fought with all the power the jailer had granted him, Kingsmorn singing with deadly energy as it carved through their defenses. Every blow he struck carried the weight of domination magic, every attack designed not just to wound, but to corrupt. The champions who faced him had to be constantly vigilant, had to fight not just against his blade, but against the insidious influence that sought to turn them into slaves as well. The spirits of the fallen came to their aid. Varian Rin, Anduin's father, who had died at the broken shore saving his soldiers from the burning legion, reached out to his son from beyond death. His voice was a whisper that somehow cut through the roar of battle, a father's love piercing the darkness that had consumed his child. He spoke of the man Anduin was meant to be, of the future that still awaited him if he could find the strength to break free. Saurfang, the honorable orc who had given his life fighting against Sylvanas at the gates of Orgrimmar, added his voice to the call. He had known Anduin, had come to respect the young king's courage and conviction. He spoke of honor and choice, of the fundamental right of every being to determine their own destiny. He reminded Anduin that submission to domination was not weakness, but violation, that fighting back was not just possible, but necessary. Other spirits joined, them, souls of those who had known Anduin in life, who had been touched by his kindness or inspired by his example. Each voice added to the chorus, a symphony of love and hope that battled against the jailer's control. The light that had always burned within Anduin, the faith that had sustained him through every trial, began to stir beneath the darkness. Together, they reminded Anduin of who he truly was, of the light that still burned within him even under all the darkness. The young king's struggles became visible, his attacks growing less coordinated, his movements hesitating at crucial moments. The conflict within him was tearing him apart, but it was also creating opportunities for the champions to act. With the help of the Crown of Wills, the champions were able to break through the domination magic holding Anduin. The artifact, forged by the Primus from the shattered helm of domination, projected a field that disrupted the jailer's control. It was not enough on its own, but combined with the spiritual intervention of those who loved Anduin, combined with his own desperate struggle for freedom, it was enough to shatter the chains that bound his will. The young king collapsed, freed at last from the jailer's control, but devastated by everything he had been forced to do. He had attacked allies, claimed sigils, served the enemy of all life. He had been the instrument of atrocities he would never have committed of his own will, and the memories of these actions would haunt him for years to come. The light that had always been his strength felt distant now, hidden behind a wall of guilt and trauma that would take lifetimes to overcome. But there was no time for recovery. The jailer was already within the sepulcher, already beginning the ritual that would grant him the power of the first ones. If he completed it, reality itself would be unmade and rebuilt according to his design. Every soul in existence, living or dead, would be bound to his will for eternity. The horrors that Anduin had experienced would become the permanent condition of all beings everywhere. The final confrontation took place in the heart of the sepulcher, in a chamber where the fundamental code of reality itself could be accessed. This was the holiest place in all of creation, the source code of existence made manifest. Walls of pure energy displayed the underlying mathematics of reality, equations that described the behavior of every particle and force in the cosmos. At the center stood a mechanism of impossible complexity, the interface through which the first ones had shaped the universe itself. The jailer stood at the center of this vast mechanism, the 5 sigils orbiting around him like moons around a dark sun, their power being channeled into the systems that maintained existence. He was transformed by the partial infusion of this power, his form shifting and growing, becoming something more than an eternal one, something approaching what the first ones themselves had been. Energy crackled around him in patterns that hurt to perceive, power that could unmake worlds with a casual gesture. The battle against Zovaal was unlike anything the champions had ever faced. He wielded power that could reshape reality, that could unmake existence with a thought. When he struck, the air itself screamed in protest. When he moved, space bent to accommodate him. He shrugged off attacks that would have destroyed lesser beings, regenerated from wounds that should have been fatal. He was fighting not just with his own strength, but with the power of the first ones themselves. The chamber became a battlefield of cosmic proportions. The jailer hurled bolts of pure entropy at his attackers, each one capable of unraveling the very essence of a being. He created zones of altered reality where the champion's attacks lost all meaning, where cause and effect became suggestions rather than rules. He summoned echoes of beings long dead, shadow copies of powerful souls that had been claimed by the Maw to fight on his behalf. But the champions were not alone. The Primus stood with them, his tactical genius guiding their efforts. He read the flow of battle as others read words on a page, issuing commands that positioned the coalition forces to exploit every weakness, avoid every trap. His own considerable combat power was augmented by millennia of experience, and he fought with a precision that even the jailer had to respect. The other Eternal Ones lent what power they could from their realms. Kyrestia, the Archon, still recovering from the wound Anduin had inflicted, channeled the faith of Bastion into a shield that protected the champions from the worst of the jailer's attacks. The Winter Queen called upon the life force of Ardenweald, sending waves of regenerating energy that healed wounds that should have been mortal. Even Prince Renathal, standing in for the imprisoned Denathrius, contributed the dark power of Revendreth, shadows that wrapped around the champions and concealed them from the jailer's sight. The Automa of Zareth Mortis, recognizing that the jailer threatened everything they had been created to protect, joined the fight. Their weapons, designed by the first ones themselves, were among the few things that could truly hurt Zovaal. They attacked with mechanical precision, timing their strikes to coincide with the moments when the jailer's defenses fluctuated. Their sacrifice was significant, many of them destroyed by the jailer's counterattacks, but they did not hesitate. Their programming demanded that they protect creation, and they would do so to the last. Even Sylvanas, broken but not destroyed, contributed what she could to the battle. She fought not with the power the jailer had granted her, for that was gone, but with the skill and determination that had made her Ranger General of Silvermoon so long ago. Her arrows found gaps in the jailer's defenses. Her tactics disrupted his concentration at critical moments. She was no longer his servant, but his enemy, and she fought with the desperation of someone seeking to atone for terrible wrongs. Slowly, impossibly, the tide began to turn. The jailer was powerful, perhaps more powerful than any being in the cosmos at that moment, but he had not yet fully claimed the power of the first ones. His ritual was incomplete, his transformation unfinished. And the champions exploited this weakness, striking at the moments when his defenses were down, chipping away at his power bit by bit. The sigils that orbited him became the focus of the assault. Each sigil contained a portion of the Eternal One's power, power that the jailer was using to fuel his ascension. If they could be disrupted, if the flow of energy could be interrupted, the ritual would fail. The champions and their allies focused their attacks on these artifacts, trying to break the connection between them and the mechanism at the heart of the Sepulcher. It was a grueling battle that seemed to last both forever and no time at all. The champions fell and rose and fell again. The jailer's attacks came in relentless waves, each one testing the limits of what mortal and immortal alike could endure. But gradually, inexorably, the balance shifted. The sigils flickered. The mechanism's rhythm faltered. The jailer's form began to destabilize. In the end, it was not raw power that defeated the jailer, but the unity of those who opposed him. He had sought to dominate all, to bend every will to his own. But the champions, the Eternal Ones, the Otoma, even his former ally Sylvanas, all stood against him. They represented everything he sought to destroy: free will, cooperation, the ability to choose one's own destiny. United in purpose, they were stronger than any single being could be, even one wielding the power of the first ones. The jailer fell. The moment of his defeat was anticlimactic after the ferocity of the battle. One moment, he was a titan of power, a being on the threshold of godhood. The next, the sigils scattered from his control, the mechanism rejected his access, and he was simply Zovaal again, stripped of everything he had sought to claim. As his power faded, as the sigils scattered from his grasp, Zovaal spoke his final words. His voice was no longer the thunder that had shaken the Sepulcher, but something quieter, almost contemplative. He warned that a divided cosmos could not survive what was coming, that the unity he had sought to impose would be necessary to face the threat that loomed beyond the borders of reality. He spoke of something he had seen in his eons of imprisonment, something that watched from the spaces between worlds, something that hungered for the destructions of everything that existed. His warning was cryptic, fragmented, the words of a being whose mind was dissipating along with his power. He saw something in the void between worlds, some danger that even he feared. He had not sought power for its own sake, he seemed to imply, but because he believed it was necessary to face what was coming. His methods had been monstrous, his actions unforgivable, but his motivation might have contained a kernel of genuine concern for existence itself. Then he was gone, his essence dissipating, his threat ended at last. The jailer, who had planned for millennia, who had come within moments of remaking reality itself, was no more. The Shadowlands were saved. Existence was saved. But his warning lingered, a shadow over the victory that the champions had achieved. The defeat of the jailer did not immediately restore order to the Shadowlands. The damage he had caused was vast, the systems of death badly disrupted by years of manipulation and crisis. Realms that had withered from anima starvation could not simply be restored by wishing. Souls that had been trapped in the maw could not simply be released by decree. The infrastructure of death, which had functioned for countless eons, had been fundamentally disrupted, and repairing it would require effort on a scale that few could truly comprehend. The Covenants faced the monumental task of rebuilding. In Bastion, the Forsworn rebellion had left deep divisions that would not heal quickly. Kyrian, who had once been comrades, now viewed each other with suspicion, their trust shattered by the conflict that had torn them apart. The Path of Ascension itself was called into question, its rigid requirements having contributed to the very crisis it was meant to prevent. Uther the Lightbringer, whose actions had helped spark the Forsworn movement, struggled to find his place in a realm that no longer knew what to believe. In Maldraxxus, the civil war had devastated the 5 houses. The House of Eyes had been effectively destroyed, its members scattered or slain, its intelligence networks dismantled. The House of the Chosen had lost many of its greatest champions, including Margrave, Crexus, whose death left a vacuum of leadership that would not easily be filled. The traitors who had served the jailer's interests had been dealt with, but the rebuilding of trust between the houses would take generations of afterlife time. Ardenweald had suffered perhaps the most grievous wounds. The wild weeds that had withered during the anima drought represented souls that could never be reborn, breaks in the cycle of natural renewal that would have consequences echoing across countless worlds for ages to come. The Winter Queen mourned each lost spirit as a child, and her grief was a palpable presence throughout her realm. The Night Fae worked tirelessly to nurture what remained, but they could not replace what had been lost. Revendreth was in turmoil despite being freed from Denathrius's control. The Venthyr had been created to serve the Sire, their very nature shaped by his will. To suddenly be without him was disorienting, even for those who had opposed his betrayal. Prince Renethal did his best to guide his people through this transition, but he faced opposition from those who could not imagine existence without Denathrius's guiding hand. But with the immediate threat ended, the work of rebuilding could begin. The Covenants, which had been forced to cooperate during the crisis, found that collaboration had benefits beyond mere survival. Knowledge and resources flowed between the realms in ways that had never occurred before. The kyrian shared their understanding of soul guidance with the Necrolords. The Night Fae taught the Venthyr about the healing power of nature. A new era of cooperation was beginning, one that might ultimately leave the Shadowlands stronger than it had been before the crisis. The most pressing concern was the Arbiter. With the original Arbiter disabled and Zovaal's attempt to seize her power thwarted, there was no one to judge the souls still arriving in the Shadowlands. Without an Arbiter, the crisis would simply continue, with souls unable to reach their proper afterlives. Every moment that passed meant more souls accumulating in Oribos, more confusion, more suffering. The attendants of Oribos did their best to maintain order, but they were not designed for this situation. They could process souls through the mechanical steps of arrival, but they could not judge. They could not perceive the totality of a being's existence and determine where it belonged. Only an Arbiter could do that, and there was no Arbiter. A new Arbiter was needed, but the creation of such a being was beyond even the power of the Eternal Ones. The vessel that the First Ones had designed required a soul to inhabit it, a being willing to give up their individual existence to become the judge of all who died. This was not a transformation that could be forced or compelled. It had to be freely chosen, a sacrifice made with full understanding of what would be lost. The Eternal Ones searched for candidates among the souls of the Shadowlands, looking for beings with the wisdom and impartiality to take on such a role. But few were willing to surrender their existence so completely. The role of Arbiter was not merely a position, but an annihilation of self, a melding with the cosmic machinery of death that would leave nothing of the original being behind. Pelagos, the Kyrian aspirant who had accompanied the champions throughout their journey, volunteered. The decision surprised many, for Pelagos was not a mighty warrior or a being of great power. He was simply an aspirant, one who had struggled with the Path of Ascension and never fully completed it. In life, Pelagos had struggled with identity and belonging. He had been born in a body that did not match who he truly was, and he had never felt comfortable until death granted him the form that matched his soul. In Bastion, he had struggled with the Path of Ascension, unable to let go of his memories and attachments as a proper kyrian was expected to do. But these struggles had taught him something valuable. He understood what it meant to be judged by a system that did not truly understand you. He knew the importance of compassion, of seeing each soul as an individual rather than as a category to be sorted. He believed that he could be a better arbiter than those who had come before, one who treated each soul with the understanding and empathy they deserved. The transformation was immediate and irreversible. Pelagos's soul was absorbed into the vessel of the Arbiter, and he became something more than what he had been. He was still himself in a way, still carrying the memories and values that had defined him. But he was also the Arbiter now, connected to the systems of death in a way that no mortal could comprehend. His first act as Arbiter was to declare that no soul would ever be condemned to the maw again without a chance at redemption. All deserved the opportunity to atone, to grow to become better than they had been. The maw would not be abolished, for some souls were truly beyond saving, but the path to it would no longer be one way. With the machinery of death restored, attention turned to other matters. Sylvanas Windrunner awaited judgment. She had been the jailer's primary agent in the mortal world, the one who had broken the helm of domination, who had burned Teldrassil, who had caused the deaths of countless innocents. Even though she had turned against the jailer in the end, she was responsible for horrors beyond counting. Her crimes stretched across years and continents, a catalogue of atrocities that would take lifetimes merely to enumerate. The burning of Teldrassil was perhaps her most infamous act. Thousands of night elves had died in those flames, civilians who had done nothing to warrant such a fate. The World Tree had been more than a city or a home. It had been a symbol of night elf civilization, a living connection to their history and their future. Sylvanas had destroyed it in a moment of spite because she had been denied a single death that she had sought. The callousness of that decision, the willingness to murder thousands as a substitute for one, revealed the depths to which she had fallen. But Teldrassil was only the beginning. The fourth war that followed had cost countless lives on both sides. Soldiers and civilians alike had died in conflicts that Sylvanas had engineered precisely to generate death. Every battle had served her true purpose, sending souls to the maw to fuel the jailer's growing power. She had sacrificed her own followers as readily as her enemies, viewing all of them as merely resources to be consumed. And then there were the souls that had been sent to the maw when the Arbiter went dormant. Every being who had died since that moment had been condemned to eternal torment, regardless of their deeds in life. Saints and sinners alike had been swept into the realm of damnation. Children who died in their beds, heroes who fell in battle, ordinary people who simply passed away from age or illness, all of them had suffered because of what Sylvanas had set in motion. The weight of these crimes was almost incomprehensible. How could any punishment be sufficient for someone who had caused suffering on such a scale? What justice could possibly be adequate when the victims numbered in the millions? Tyrande Whisperwind, the leader of the Night Elves, whose people had suffered most from Sylvanas's actions, was given the right to determine her fate. This was not a decision made lightly. Many had argued that Sylvanas should face a tribunal, that her crimes were so vast that no single being should decide her fate. Others had insisted that the Eternal Ones should judge her, that mortal concepts of justice were inadequate for crimes of cosmic significance. But in the end, it was agreed that Tyrande, as the representative of those who had suffered most, should have the final say. Many expected Tyrande to demand death, or worse, eternal torment in the maw. The Night Elves had lost their home, their people, their very hope because of Sylvanas. Tyrande herself had been transformed by her grief and rage, claiming the power of the Night Warrior, an aspect of Elune so dangerous that it had consumed every previous mortal who had wielded it. She had burned with the desire for vengeance, had hunted Sylvanas across worlds with single-minded determination. Justice seemed to demand the harshest possible punishment, but Tyrande had learned something during her own journey through the Shadowlands. She had pursued the Night Warrior's power, the darkest aspect of Elune, seeking the strength to destroy Sylvanas. That power had nearly consumed her, nearly transformed her into something as monstrous as what she sought to destroy. The Night Warrior's fury was not merely anger, but a cosmic force of destruction, one that cared nothing for the vessel it burned through. Tyrande had felt herself being consumed from within, her identity dissolving in the flames of vengeance. Only by releasing it, by choosing something other than pure vengeance, had she survived. In the groves of Ardenweald, with the help of the Winter Queen and the spirits of Elune, she had found another way. She had learned that vengeance was not the same as justice, that destroying Sylvanas would not bring back the dead or heal the wounds that had been inflicted. She had chosen to live, chosen to lead her people forward, chosen to be something more than merely a weapon of retribution. This experience shaped the judgment she would render. Tyrande understood, in a way that perhaps no other being could, both the depths of Sylvanas's crimes and the limitations of simple vengeance as a response. She would not give Sylvanas the peace of death. Death would be an escape, a release from the consequences of her actions. Instead, she sentenced the former Banshee Queen to a task that would take ages to complete. She would descend into the maw and personally rescue every soul that had been sent there unjustly because of her actions. Every knight, elf who had died at Teldrassil, every soldier who had fallen in the wars she had started, every innocent who had been swept into the maw when the anima drought prevented proper judgment, all of them would need to be found and freed. The maw was not a place that anyone would willingly enter. Even with the jailer defeated, it remained a realm of torment, home to the most irredeemable souls in existence. To walk its steps was to experience suffering beyond mortal understanding. To seek specific souls within its vastness, was to undertake a task of impossible scope. The maw was designed to be inescapable, to prevent even the possibility of departure. Sylvanas would have to fight her way in, again and again, rescue soul after soul, all while enduring the horrors of the realm she had helped empower. It was a sentence that might take eternity to complete. The souls lost to the maw numbered in the millions, and each one would need to be individually located and freed. Sylvanas would have no rest, no respite, no relief until the last innocent was returned to their proper afterlife. She would spend eons doing the work of salvation, becoming the opposite of what she had been, a rescuer rather than a destroyer. But it was also a chance at redemption, an opportunity for Sylvanas to undo some of the harm she had caused. She would experience the suffering of the maw firsthand, would come to understand what she had condemned so many to endure. She would face the souls of her victims, would see the pain she had inflicted, would carry that weight with her through every moment of her endless labor. Perhaps in time, she would find something like peace. Perhaps she would discover within herself the woman she had been before Arthas had destroyed her, the Ranger General who had been beloved by her people. Or perhaps she would simply toil forever, never finding forgiveness, never escaping the consequences of her choices. Whether she would find any peace at the end of that road remained to be seen. But Tyrande had given her something that Sylvanas had denied to so many others. A future that was not merely punishment, but possibility. Anduin Wrynn chose not to return to Azeroth immediately. The trauma of his domination, of being forced to harm his friends and serve the enemy of all life, had wounded him in ways that physical healing could not address. He had lost his connection to the light, the faith that had sustained him throughout his life. He needed time to recover, to find himself again, to determine who he was when everything he had believed in had been shattered. The light had been Anduin's constant companion since childhood. He had not been a warrior by nature, but a healer, a diplomat, one who sought to mend rather than destroy. His faith had been his strength, his ability to call upon the light, a manifestation of his fundamental belief in the goodness of existence. When the jailer had dominated him, that connection had been severed. The light did not answer to commands, it did not respond to empty gestures. It required genuine faith, and Anduin's faith had been shattered. He remembered everything he had done under the jailer's control. The faces of those he had attacked, the sound of his own voice, speaking words he would never have chosen, the feel of Kingsmorn in his hands as it struck down allies who had trusted him. These memories played behind his eyes whenever he closed them, an endless reel of horrors that he could not escape. The worst memory was claiming the sigils. He had been the instrument of the jailer's plan, had personally retrieved the artifacts that had allowed Zovaal to breach the Sepulcher. Without Anduin's actions, the jailer might have failed. Without Anduin, existence itself might not have been threatened. He had been a tool of cosmic evil, and no amount of explaining that he had been controlled could change the facts of what he had done. He left the leadership of the Alliance in the capable hands of Tyrande, the ancient paladin who had served the light since before Anduin was born. Tyrande was not a gentle ruler, not a diplomat in the way Anduin had been. His faith was absolute, his certainty unshakable, and some questioned whether he was the right choice to lead in such complicated times. But Anduin could not lead, not now, not in this condition. He needed to find himself again before he could find his way back to his responsibilities. The young king sent letters to those who mattered most to him. To Gin Greymane, who had been like a second father since Varian's death, he wrote of his need for time and his hope that Gen would continue to serve the Alliance. To Jaina Proudmoore, who had shared his captivity in Torghast, he wrote of his gratitude for her strength and his certainty that she would help guide the Alliance through whatever challenges lay ahead. To Wrathion, the Black Dragon, who had been his complicated friend for years, he wrote something more personal, something that the dragon would understand. Then he disappeared into the Shadowlands, seeking the solitude and the answers he needed. The realms of death offered something that the living world could not: perspective. Here, souls that had endured terrible traumas had found ways to heal. Here, beings had faced the worst that existence could offer and had emerged transformed. Perhaps among the dead, Anduin could find the path back to himself. Some said he went to find Sylvanas in the Maw, to help her with her task, or to find closure for what she had made him do. There was a connection between them now, a shared experience of domination that no one else could truly understand. Perhaps by confronting her, by seeing the one who had set his torment in motion, he could begin to process what had happened to him. Others said he wandered the realms of death, speaking with souls who had found peace after their own traumas. In Bastion, kyrian who had once been mortals, with terrible pasts, had found transcendence. In Maldraxxus, warriors who had died in anguish had discovered purpose. In Ardenweald, spirits that had been wounded in life had been healed and prepared for rebirth. Perhaps in witnessing these transformations, Anduin could believe that his own was possible. Still others whispered that he sought out souls he had known in life. His father Varian, who had died at the Broken Shore, his mother Tiffin, who had died when he was just an infant, his aunt Kalia, who had been raised as undead but had found a new purpose. Perhaps in the company of family, living and dead, Anduin could find the comfort that had eluded him in the world of the living. The truth was known only to Anduin himself. He walked the paths of the Shadowlands, a king without a crown, a priest without a prayer, a young man who had seen too much and needed to find his way back to hope. His story was not over, merely entering a new chapter, one that would be written in solitude and contemplation rather than in battles and councils. The crisis in the Shadowlands had ended, but its effects continued to ripple outward. The Covenants had been united by the threat of the jailer, forced to work together in ways they never had before. That cooperation did not immediately end with his defeat. The Eternal Ones began to consider new ways of organizing their realms, new approaches to the eternal work of managing death. The isolation that had defined the Covenants for eons was giving way to something new, a recognition that they were all parts of a greater whole. Regular councils were established, gatherings where representatives of all four covenants could discuss matters of common concern. These meetings were held in Oribos, neutral ground that belonged to no single realm. Agreements were reached about the distribution of anima, about the handling of souls that might fit multiple afterlives, about responses to potential future threats. The Shadowlands was becoming a more unified system, one that might be better able to withstand whatever challenges lay ahead. The Primus returned to Maldraxxus, where he rebuilt the 5 houses that had been shattered by civil war. The task was monumental. The House of Eyes, which had been destroyed entirely, had to be reconstituted from scratch. New agents had to be recruited, new networks established, new protocols developed. The institutional knowledge that had been lost when the house fell could not be easily replaced, but the Primus was patient, and he had eternity in which to work. The traitors who had sided with the jailer's agents were dealt with according to Maldraxxi justice. Those who had been manipulated or coerced were given opportunities to prove their renewed loyalty through service. Those who had chosen betrayal of their own free will faced harsher consequences. The Primus himself oversaw these proceedings, his judgment fair but unyielding. Maldraxxus had no room for those who could not be trusted to serve. Loyal Necrolords were elevated to positions of authority. Draka, who had fought so bravely during the Civil War and had proven herself time and again as a champion of the House of the Chosen, was recognized as one of the realm's greatest heroes. The Primus himself acknowledged her contributions, praising her as an example of what a Maldraxxi soul could become. Her son Thrall, who had returned to Azeroth after the crisis, carried with him the pride of knowing that his mother had found purpose and honor in death. The armies of Maldraxxus would once again stand ready to defend the Shadowlands from external threats. The Primus implemented new training protocols, drawing on lessons learned from the war against the jailer. He established early warning systems that would detect threats before they could mature into full crises. He forged alliances with the Automa of Zereth Mortis, ensuring that the defenses of the creation realm would be coordinated with those of the Shadowlands proper. Maldraxxus would not be caught off guard again. The Winter Queen continued her work in Ardenweald, tending to the wild souls in her care and overseeing the cycle of rebirth. The wound of the anima drought would take ages to fully heal. So many souls had been lost, so many wild spirits that would never return to the mortal world. The Winter Queen mourned each one, carried the weight of their absence in her eternal heart, but she also looked forward, nurturing the souls that remained, ensuring that the cycle would continue even if it had been diminished. With anima flowing properly again, the wild weeds could be nurtured as they should be, and souls that had been in danger of fading could be restored. The Night Fae worked with renewed purpose, their efforts no longer driven by desperation, but by hope. The glades of Ardenweald began to regain their luminescence, the trees their vitality, the spirits their joy. It was not the same as it had been before, but it was alive, and that was what mattered. Ysera, the great green dragon, was among those who would eventually be reborn. Her wildweed had been carefully nurtured throughout the crisis, protected even when resources were scarce. The Winter Queen had recognized Ysera's importance, not just to Azeroth but to the concept of nature itself. Her spirit healed slowly, the corruption that had claimed her in life being purged by the gentle ministrations of the Night Fae. One day, she would return to the mortal world, bringing with her the wisdom of her time in Ardenweald. The connection between Ardenweald and the Emerald Dream grew stronger in the aftermath of the crisis. The Winter Queen reached out to her sister Elune, and for the first time in ages beyond counting, they communicated directly. Their reunion was not a physical meeting, but a spiritual communion, a sharing of essence across the boundaries between cosmic realms. Those who witnessed the event spoke of feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature, a sense of completion that defied description. Carestia the Archon recovered from the wound Anduin had inflicted upon her, though the experience had changed her. She had felt Kingsmorn pierce her essence, had experienced the domination magic that had been used to enslave so many. She understood now in a visceral way what the Forsworn had been rebelling against. The rigid certainty that had defined her rule was tempered by a new appreciation for doubt, for questioning, for the value of individual perspective. She began to reconsider the rigid ways of Bastion, the insistence that all kyrian must surrender their memories and attachments. Perhaps there was value in what Uther and Devos had believed, in maintaining some connection to one's past. Perhaps the Path of Ascension could be reformed to allow for different ways of serving. Perhaps souls could contribute to Bastion's purpose without losing everything that made them who they were. The reforms were controversial. Many kyrian had achieved ascension through the traditional path and saw any changes as a betrayal of what they had sacrificed. Others welcomed the opportunity to serve without giving up the memories that defined them. Debates raged through the golden halls of Bastion, discussions that would have been unthinkable before the crisis. The realm was evolving, becoming something new. Uther the Lightbringer found himself at the center of these debates. His role in the Forsworn rebellion, his casting of Arthas into the Maw, his struggle with the trauma of his death, all of these made him a complicated figure. Some saw him as a hero who had fought for necessary reforms. Others saw him as a villain who had helped spark a civil war. In the end, Uther chose to remain in Bastion, but not as a full kyrian. He could not complete the Path of Ascension, could not surrender the rage that still burned within him. But he could serve in other ways, using his experience to help other souls who struggled with similar traumas. Revendreth underwent the most dramatic transformation. With Denathrius defeated and imprisoned, the realm needed new leadership. The power vacuum left by the Sire's fall was immense. He had shaped every aspect of Revendreth's existence, had created the Venthyr themselves as extensions of his will. Without him, the realm had to discover who it was, what it was meant to be. Prince Renathal, who had led the rebellion against the Sire, became the new ruler of the Venthyr. He did not take the title of Sire, believing that such titles belonged to the old order. Instead, he called himself simply the Harvester of Souls, a functional title that emphasized service over authority. He promised to maintain Revendreth's purpose, the redemption of sinful souls, while eliminating the cruelty and corruption that had defined Denathrius's reign. The reforms he implemented were substantial. The most excessive torments were eliminated, replaced with therapies designed to achieve the same spiritual results with less suffering. The harvesting of anima was regulated, with limits placed on how much could be extracted from any individual soul. The competition between harvesters was moderated, the worst excesses of their rivalries curtailed. Revendreth remained a place of redemption through suffering, but the suffering was now proportionate to the sin. But Denathrius himself was not destroyed. His essence had been captured within his sentient blade, Remornia, and the sword was placed under guard in a secure location. The Venthyr understood that Denathrius was too powerful to simply be killed, that his essence would eventually find a way to regenerate if not properly contained. Even stripped Of his physical form, he remained one of the most ancient and dangerous beings in existence, a creature whose cunning had outmaneuvered opponents for longer than most worlds had existed. They entrusted his imprisonment to Zarali, a Naru who had been held captive in Revendreth for ages. The Naru had suffered at Denathrius's hands, had been drained of her light to fuel his schemes. It seemed fitting that she should be his jailer, that she should watch over the being who had tormented her for so long. Her vigilance was constant, her determination absolute. It was not enough. The Nathrezim, the dreadlords who had served Denathrius since the beginning, had not been destroyed with the jailer. Many of them had been killed during the war, their infiltration of various cosmic factions exposed and punished. But others had escaped, slipping away into the shadows as their master's plans crumbled. These were beings of supreme patience and cunning, creatures who had spent eons learning the art of manipulation. They would not abandon their creator, would not accept his imprisonment as final. These survivors returned to Revendreth, infiltrating the realm they had once called home. They moved in shadows, wore disguises, assumed identities that no one would question. The chaos of the post-war period worked to their advantage, the upheaval of Renathal's reforms, creating confusion that skilled infiltrators could exploit. Slowly, carefully, they positioned themselves for the moment of action. They freed Denathrius from his prison, stealing Remornia, and spiriting their master away to safety. The operation was executed with precision that spoke of ages of experience. By the time the Venthyr realized what had happened, Denathrius and his dreadlords were gone, vanished into the vastness of the cosmos, where even the Eternal Ones could not easily follow. The sire of Revendreth was loose once more, his power diminished, but his ambition unbroken. He had suffered a setback, nothing more. He had been planning for eons before his imprisonment, and he had eternity ahead of him in which to plan again. He had allies in the Nathrezim, resources hidden across multiple realities, knowledge accumulated over ages that few could comprehend. His return was not a question of if, but of when. This was one of the warnings that the jailer's final words had hinted at. The threat to the cosmos was not entirely external. Enemies remained within, beings of power and ambition who would seek to exploit any weakness. Denathrius was one such being, perhaps the most dangerous still at large. His understanding of domination magic, his connections to the other cosmic forces through his dreadlord agents, his ancient grudges and ambitions, all of these made him a threat that could not be ignored. And there might be others. The cosmos was vast, filled with powers that even the Eternal Ones did not fully comprehend. The war against the jailer had exposed vulnerabilities in the Shadowlands that enemies might seek to exploit. The breakdown of the Arbiter had demonstrated that the systems of death were not as invulnerable as they had seemed. Any being with sufficient power and ambition might look at what the jailer had almost accomplished and wonder if they could succeed where he had failed. And beyond even this, there was the warning about what lay beyond the borders of reality. The jailer had seen something in the void, some threat that had motivated his desire to unify all of existence under his control. His methods had been monstrous, his actions unforgivable, but had his perception of danger been correct? Was there truly something out there, watching from beyond the known cosmos, hungering for destruction on a scale that dwarfed even the jailer's ambitions? The Eternal Ones debated this question at length in their councils. Some believed that the jailer had been delusional, that his warnings were merely the ravings of a tyrant seeking justification for his crimes. Others worried that his perception had been accurate, that the Ars cosmos faced dangers beyond anything they had prepared for. The truth remained unknown, a mystery that might take ages to resolve. What was clear was that vigilance would be required. The Shadowlands had nearly fallen, had come within moments of being unmade entirely. The systems that governed death had proven vulnerable to manipulation and attack. If the realm of death was to survive whatever challenges lay ahead, it would need to be stronger, more unified, more prepared than it had ever been before. He had been defeated, but the danger he had perceived remained, a shadow hanging over the victory that the forces of order had achieved. The champions of Azeroth returned to their world, their mission in the Shadowlands complete. They had saved the realm of death, defeated an enemy who sought to unmake existence itself, and rescued allies who had been imprisoned by the forces of the Maw. They were heroes in every sense of the word. Their deeds would be remembered across the cosmos, their names spoken with reverence by beings who would never know the details of what they had endured. The return to Azeroth was strange for many of them. They had walked in the realm of death, had spoken with beings who had passed beyond the veil, had fought in battles that transcended mortal understanding. The world of the living seemed somehow smaller now, more fragile, more precious. They looked upon their homelands with new eyes, seeing the beauty and the vulnerability of existence in ways they never had before. Some struggled to readjust. The trauma of what they had experienced, the horrors they had witnessed, the losses they had suffered, all of these left marks that would not easily fade. Veterans of the Shadowlands found themselves haunted by memories of Torghast, by echoes of the jailer's voice, by the faces of allies who had not survived the journey. Support networks formed among those who had been there, gatherings where survivors could share their experiences with others who truly understood. Others found that their journey had changed them for the better. They had faced death itself and emerged victorious. They had learned that even the cosmic order could be challenged and reformed. They returned to their lives with a determination to make the most of the time they had been given, to live in ways that would earn them worthy afterlives when their mortal journeys ended. The experience of the Shadowlands had given them perspective, had shown them what truly mattered, but their world was not at peace. The rift above Icecrown had been sealed, but scars remained. The sky over the frozen wastes still bore traces of the wound that had been inflicted, a subtle wrongness that sensitive observers could perceive. Azeroth herself was still wounded, still bleeding from the injuries inflicted by Sargeras's blade. The world soul that gave the planet life continued to suffer, and no one knew how long she could endure. The factions of the Alliance and Horde still struggled to coexist, their old hatreds not easily forgotten. The fourth war that Sylvanas had engineered had left deep wounds on both sides, grievances that would take generations to heal. Turalyon led the Alliance with a firm hand, perhaps too firm for some, his certainty leaving little room for the diplomatic nuance that Anduin had favored. The Horde struggled to find its identity after so many changes in leadership, its council system still finding its footing, and new threats were already emerging, dangers that would require the same courage and determination that had been shown in the Shadowlands. The Dragon Isles were stirring, awakening after ages of slumber. Ancient powers were beginning to move, forces that had been dormant since before the Sundering. The champions of Azeroth would be needed once again, their skills tested by challenges that no one could yet fully anticipate. The story of the Shadowlands was complete, but the story of Azeroth continued. Death had been saved, but life still needed its champions, and those champions would rise to meet whatever challenges awaited them, just as they always had. The world had nearly ended before, many times, and each time heroes had emerged to save it. This pattern would continue, the eternal cycle of crisis and salvation that seemed to define existence on this remarkable world. The cycle of life and death continued, as it was always meant to continue. Souls passed through the veil, were judged by the new Arbiter, and found their way to the afterlives that awaited them. The transition was gentler now, the judgment more compassionate. Pelagos understood suffering in ways that no previous Arbiter had, and he brought that understanding to every soul that passed before him. The covenants tended to their charges, the Eternal Ones ruled their realms, and the machinery of death turned as it had turned since the beginning. But the isolation that had defined the covenants was broken now, replaced by cooperation and mutual support. The lessons of the crisis had been learned, at least for a time. The Shadowlands would face whatever came next as a unified force, not as a collection of separate realms. Even the Maw was no longer the place of absolute torment it had once been. Sylvanas' work of redemption was changing it, soul by soul. She descended into its depths daily, searching for innocents who had been condemned unjustly, guiding them to freedom one at a time. It was slow work, painful work, work that might never truly be complete. But she continued, driven by the weight of her crimes and the faint hope that one day she might earn something like forgiveness. The souls she freed often did not thank her. Many of them recognized her as the one who had condemned them in the first place, the architect of their suffering. Their anger was justified, their hatred earned. Sylvanas accepted it all, absorbed their curses and their accusations without flinching. She was not seeking gratitude. She was seeking atonement, and atonement was not meant to be easy. Sometimes, rarely, a freed soul would pause before departing the Maw. They would look at Sylvanas with something other than hatred, something that might have been recognition of the change she was attempting. These moments sustained her, gave her the strength to continue when the weight of her sins threatened to crush her completely. She was not the woman she had been, not the Ranger General of Silvermoon, not the Banshee Queen, not the jailer's servant. She was something new, something that had not yet earned a name. But nothing was quite the same as it had been. The crisis had changed things, had forced the Shadowlands to evolve. Pelagos brought a new perspective to the role of Arbiter, one that valued compassion and understanding alongside justice. When he judged a soul, he did not merely perceive its deeds, but understood its context, the circumstances that had shaped its choices, the struggles it had faced. His judgments were fair but also merciful, recognizing that even flawed souls often deserved chances at redemption. The covenants worked together more closely than they ever had before. their isolation broken by the shared struggle against the jailer. Trade routes were established between realms, something that would have been unthinkable before the crisis. Kyrian visited Maldraxxus to observe military techniques. Venther studied the healing practices of Ardenweald. Knowledge flowed freely, enriching all who participated. The first ones had designed a system, but systems can change. They can grow, adapt, become something more than what their creators intended. Perhaps the first ones had anticipated this, had built into their creation the capacity for evolution. Or perhaps they had never imagined that their work would be tested so severely, would need to adapt in order to survive. Either way, the Shadowlands that emerged from the crisis was not the same as the one that had existed before, and perhaps that was for the best. For in the end, the story of the Shadowlands was not about death. It was about what comes after death, about the choices souls make when their mortal lives have ended. It was about the understanding that existence does not end with the cessation of breath, that the story of a being continues beyond the moment of passing. It was about the hope that even in the realm of the dead, change is possible, growth is possible, redemption is possible. It was about redemption and judgment, about unity and division, about the eternal struggle between domination and freedom. The jailer had sought to dominate all, to impose his will upon every being in existence. He had failed because free beings chose to oppose him, chose to fight for their right to determine their own destinies. This choice, this assertion of individual will against cosmic tyranny, was perhaps the most important theme of the entire crisis. It was about the understanding that even death is not the end, that every soul has a story that continues beyond the moment of passing. When mortals died on Azeroth, they did not simply cease to exist. They transitioned to a new phase of existence, one that might last for eternity. What they did in that eternal existence mattered just as much as what they had done in life, perhaps more so. It was about the hope that even the most damaged spirits can find healing, even the most lost can find their way home. Uther had been shattered by his death, his soul literally torn in two by Frostmourne, yet he had found a path forward, had found ways to serve, even when he could not complete the traditional Kyrian ascension. His example offered hope to all who struggled with the wounds of their mortal lives. And it was about the heroes who made this possible, the champions who ventured into the realm of death and returned, having saved not just the Shadowlands, but the very concept of what death means. They had challenged the cosmic order itself and had emerged victorious. They had shown that even the systems designed by the first ones could be questioned, could be reformed, could be made better. The night deepens now, and the story draws to a close. In the realms of the Shadowlands, souls continue their eternal journeys. In the world of the living, champions rest and prepare for whatever comes next. The cycle continues, life flowing into death, death nourishing life, the great wheel turning as it has turned since the beginning of existence. If you enjoyed this journey through the complete story of Shadowlands, please consider subscribing to World of Sleepcraft for more tales from the Warcraft universe. Your support helps us continue bringing these stories to life. Until next time, may your dreams be peaceful and your rest be deep.